Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I am glad that you all can be with me. I have to be very honest with you this morning. I'm dragging ass. I'm just a man, but I'm just a man fighting the cold. And being a man fighting the cold, I strongly considered not doing the show this morning. But I thought that when I do the news, real men can't sleep, real men do the news, my powers are at their highest. And maybe when my powers at their highest, I can beat back the blob, if you want to call it that. I don't know. Either way, I'm going to do the show. And we have some really good guests on the show for you today. Patrick Henningsen, he's going to be on the show. He hit me up, I believe it was yesterday, and he said something to the effect of, hey, there is a way that Iran could effectively skewer Israel and Trump in this. His idea is sound. It's interesting. And I wanted to talk about it. So he's going to come on the show. We're going to have this conversation as this back and forth between Iran and Trump takes place, with Trump threatening Iran. We're also going to have Esteban Carrillo. There it is. Esteban Carrillo. He will be on the show talking about the execution that took place where they effectively murdered all of those people in cold blood, those rescue workers. Bomb goes off, rescue workers goes in, Israel kills the rescue workers, digs a mass grave, buries the ambulance with a bulldozer in the mass grave with the people who they had just slaughtered. As they were excavating the mass grave, they were seeing some of the people had their arms tied behind their back, meaning they were shot with their already tied behind their back, placed against the wall. That story is ghastly. And the wild part about it, it's not the only one. Like, you can almost go day by day and find a story just as ghastly. But this really puts you in the mind of Nazi Germany, right? And the stuff that Nazis were doing to Jews. It is disgusting, to put it mildly. It is a war crime under any circumstances. The idea that you tie up medics, doctors, people who are there in order to save and rescue the people who you've already injured and killed. I can't even say it's astonishing, because they've been doing it the entire time. We also have KJ Noh, which is a fan favorite. And KJ is a favorite of mine. Also, I enjoy talking to him. He is a really good guest. He knows China and Asia like the back of his hand. He's going to go into, I want to have a conversation with him about Wang Yi being in Russia and the conversations that they were having. There is, also, Liberation Day. Liberation Day. If you don't know what that is, or if you don't know what that means, that is the term that Donald Trump is using to describe his tariffs that he is effectively placing on the world. Trump versus the world. And these tariffs, I think they're going to go out at 4 p.m. today. We don't know how they're going to be laid out, meaning we don't know if it's going to be a flat rate on pretty much everybody. We don't know if it's going to be differences in the amount of tariffs that he's placing on various places. We have no idea. Donald Trump seems to not care about the economic damage and toll. At one point, when he was talking about cars, he was like, I don't care. I don't care. If people have to pay more for cars, then so be it. They would be more likely to buy American cars. Okay. That is the theory, right? Like, if China produces a car for $10,000 and you put like 100% tariff on that car, So that car now costs $20,000 because, you know, that money is, that cost is going to go to the consumer. And you have American cars that are around the same price, then maybe people will be more likely to buy American cars. I think the rub is, though, it's not like you're increasing wages. It's not like you're increasing the minimum wage. So to compensate for the fact that people are spending more. And some countries have effectively pushed back on this. Effectively, China, in fact, how short? China, was it China? I think it was Japan, North. Give me one moment. I have the article up. Right here. China, Japan, South Korea will join together, that is an odd combination. That is a really odd combination. Japan and South Korea have a very tortured history, to put it mildly, with the comfort women, the slaves, and all of this other stuff. Japan and China have a tortured history, again, with invasions, killings, and everything else that took place, not to mention the war in the Second World War. And yet, in order to deal with Donald Trump, no F's to give, they are joining together in order to rebuff Donald Trump. That being said, it will damage the world economy. Let's be very clear. And it will damage our own economy. The reason that the stock market has been freaking out and been in free fall, especially the S&P, has been because of stuff like this. And it is unclear what this is going to actually do. Now, Trump believes in his mind that we need to re-entrench jobs back into America. He wants to bring jobs from back overseas. And his thinking is the way to do that is by increasing costs through tariffs. And if we increase costs through tariffs, companies may be more inclined to come back to the United States. And in coming back to the United States, there will be more jobs for American workers. And ideally, you will pay those American workers more than what you might be paying somewhere else abroad. Globalism has been going on for the last, 50 years? And the entire point was for companies to maximize their profits. If Bob works for me at a factory, Bob makes $20 an hour. Great for Bob. And then I realized, hey, I can go to China. I can go to Mexico. I can go to random Timbuktu. And I can pay those people $2 an hour. Now, beforehand, those people were only making $1. And so I am doubling their salary. So I'm giving them $2 an hour. But I'm firing Bob. So what does it mean in regards to profit? Well, you no longer have to pay $15 an hour. You're paying $2 an hour for the exact same work that Bob was doing. And if you get a good administration that would allow you to ship those products into the US with little to no cost, then you've exploded your profit margin. You're selling a product for practically the same price, hell, maybe even less to get more market share. You're paying somebody like $2, $3 an hour in order to make the product, and you fired Bob. Now, the reality of it is labor is one of the most expensive aspects of a company. And so if you can get rid of that labor by putting in a robot or sending that labor somewhere else, you will do so. It is your modus operandi to expand your profit margin. Okay, so what happens though? 50 years later, when you get a president who says, you know what? Maybe you can't import that product back into the United States for nothing. Maybe there's a cost for you to do that. Maybe there's a cost for you to do that. Now, again, our entire model of operation has gotten very accustomed to the way it operates. And so for Donald Trump to effectively take a dump in the pool that everybody's drinking from, there will be consequences. There will be consequences. And don't take my word for those consequences. This is a fascinating clip by Fox News. It is propaganda on steroids. They are trying to back their guy. I don't know if this is going to fly in the way they think this is going to fly. But listen to what she says here. This is very important. Listen to what she says. It's funny in a way, but what she's talking. It's effectively people taking a hit. And one more thing. I want you to think back to Jen Psaki. When they passed sanctions on the Russians, and they said, we're not going to take Russian gas anymore. We're done. Putin invaded. He's trying to take over all of Europe. We're not going to tolerate it. And so they say, we're no longer going to accept Russian oil. Fair enough. We could do that. I think we're getting 77,000 barrels a day. I think. The moment that you stop doing that, inflation hits. The prices float up because you have to compensate for the fact that you are no longer getting energy at that particular rate, and you have to find it from somewhere else at a higher rate. Jen Psaki comes out and says, our values are not without cost. Oh, I love that clip. God, I love that clip. Our values are not without cost. And what she means by that is we are taking a principled value stand against the Russians. And because we're taking that principled stand against the Russians, there's a cost associated with that principled stance. And so we, as Americans, will take the hit collectively for doing so. Now, this is rather outrageous, right? When you read the New York Times article that recently came out that pointed out that the United States was invested in that war, we were effectively fighting the Russians. We were pushing NATO expansion. We were doing all of this stuff that effectively lit this war afire in a way that it never needed to take place, blowing off the Minsk agreements, expanding NATO to the border, trying to get NATO into Ukraine. All of these things were red lines. In fact, the entire point of the Minsk agreements was to prevent a war. So the fact that you're blowing them off, it was inevitable. It was inevitable. You can listen to Aristovich. You can listen to Merkel saying, yeah, we blew them off. We never really meant to follow through with the Minsk agreements. The shelling of Donbass that one of the people that I had on, Andre, pointed out, that was a CIA guy, or the US was directing those bombing strikes against the breakaway regions. I'm pointing out that her saying our values are not without cost. Okay, it's one thing if we had nothing to do with it. It's a whole nother thing when we were completely involved all the way through that process, including arming Ukraine, directing their military campaigns into Russia and everything else. And then they would come away with the argument, well, the only reason Ukraine lost is because they didn't listen to us. It's not that the Russians were good. It's not that they were sophisticated. It's not that they kicked our ass. It's the Ukrainians were hard-headed and didn't listen. Good luck with that excuse. The point I'm making here is Jen Psaki was perfectly fine in saying something very similar to this Fox News piece. Listen to what she says here. Listen to what she says. This is fantastic. Where is it? There it is.
And those 401k people who are depending, those retirees, all of that, just talking plain speak with them. Look, when this nation used to go to war, people in this country would support the war effort with their materials at home and making things for weaponry and all of that. We got to do 100% buy-in over this bumpy period. Just communicate.
Haley.
And those 401k.
She is arguing that Trump tariffs are effectively similar to America going to war. Let's say like in the Second World War, where grandmas were making missiles and women were going into the workforce and people were taking the hit financially because we were at war as a country. We were all united. And Trump is doing this on his own. He's doing this on his own. Nobody is telling him to do this. Right here, Liberation Day, as Trump is calling it. Nobody's telling him to do this. Like, this is him pulling this nonsense by himself. Trump's Liberation Day tariffs will go into effect immediately, White House says. And I want to go to a part of this right here. Economic wipeout. Where is it? Right here. A Moody's simulation found that such an escalation in the trade war would wipe out 5.5 million jobs, lift the unemployment rate to 7%, and cause the U.S. GDP to drop by 1.7% from peak to trough. If that happens, we will get a serious recession It is a wipeout for the economy, unquote. Zandy says, adding that he thinks Trump will announce a less extreme tariff regime to avoid such damage. We have no idea what Donald Trump is going to do. What she knows, though, is that all of those people who have, let's say, 401ks, and the stock market drops, it is damaging to those people who have 401ks. And her response to get ahead of that reality that's going to take place is, we're effectively at war. When we were at war, all of us had to work together. All of us had to take the burden. We had to take the hit for America. Doesn't that sound a lot like Jen Psaki's "Our values are not without cost"? Values are not without cost. Now, the problem with both of these, our values are not without cost, and we must take the hit as if we're in war. A, we're not in war. You can make an argument that we're at war with the Russians, but the Russians are not acknowledging that. They're acknowledging it as a proxy so they can avoid actually striking America. Fair enough. In Jen Psaki's case, whose values are you talking about? They weren't my values. My values are not to provoke a war. My values is keep my ass at home. Your values are that, but all of us have to pay for your values in the sense of being a neocon and provoking a war with another nuclear power. Just amazing. He is calling this, however, Liberation Day. Liberation Day. That is amazing. That is amazing. If you did not know, a tariff is a tax. A tariff is a tax. And Trump is presenting this as if, well, we are going to get all of this money back from all of these governments, as if those governments are not going to inflate the cost of whatever they're selling in the country to recoup that money so they don't necessarily take that hit. And yes, some countries are freaked out. The UK, because the UK is no longer with the European Union, they're going to take a hit. Their steel industry may just collapse. Some of the reading for the EU show that their economy could drop by like 1.5% or something to that effect over a trade war. KJ Noh has pointed out, though, that the trade balance between the US and China is not as big as it seems. Even though it is big, it represents like a region of China because of the size and scale of China. And all of those countries are working in tandem in order to push back against Trump, because a group will be better than an individual nation. We'll see what this looks like. Apparently, like I said, 4 p.m., this is coming out. Trump is trying to protect the economy of the United States now that the global order has fundamentally changed. What he recognizes is we are no longer getting the betterment of this globalism stuff. And Vance said it out loud. Damn it, I should have pulled that clip up for Vance. Vance, when he gave that speech, he pointed out very clearly and very honestly, we believe that with the global order the way it was back then, when we were setting this process up of globalization, that, let's say, Western nations will remain on top, that we would come up with the designs and we would send them out for other countries to build them and then ship them back. And in doing so, we would have the intellectual property and we would have effectively the balance of control and leverage in that system, in which case we will remain on top in perpetuity and they will remain where they are in perpetuity. And he pointed out, yeah, weirdly enough, those countries didn't want to remain on the bottom. And they started building stuff themselves. And they started building stuff, creating designs, and sending that stuff out. And this is no longer in our best interests as America. So we need to change the global order of things. Hence, Donald Trump trying to use tariffs to reorganize the world economy. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. We will see how this goes. I am very dubious that Trump is going to get the effect that he wants. I strongly suspect that it will create a recession, depending upon how aggressive he goes along with this push. We will see. I'm fascinated by it. I love the fact that she's preempting it, though, saying, hey, I know your 401ks are going to take a hit because the stock market is collapsing. And oh man, Jim Cramer, even Jim Cramer is flipping out. Initially, when Jim Cramer was talking about Trump, he was like, yes, we're finally getting a good man going into office who's going to cut my taxes. That's not the way Jim Cramer is talking about now. Jim Cramer is flipping out. Oh my God, the stock market is collapsing. What the hell is Donald Trump doing? Why is he doing these tariffs? Why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? Now, you may even get Republicans lumping in with Democrats in order to try to do something about it, because all of them are freaked out. They are concerned that their local communities is going to take a hit. Those people are going to get very pissed off. It's the economy stupid. It's the economy stupid. And they're going to aim the fire directly at Trump. Directly at Trump. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. A shout out to my audience, by the way. Let's see, Joe Hack, Tom, shout out to you. U.S. Navy vet, shout out to you. Born Zulu. Oh, that is epic. There are some names that are so epic because of what the connotation that they're given. Born Zulu. I'm out here with a spear going after people. Badass, love that name. President Jafar, shout out to you. Jin Ho Choi. I started doing that. There are some people who do this and they do it very well. And when you watch them do it, you are impressed, to put it mildly, right? Stabby Sabs. I was watching a segment of hers, and I'll go to the next story, but I want to get this first. I was watching a segment of hers where I think she was doing the TYT breakdown. And she was so good. Like the casualness in which she would engage with her audience, the ease in which she would flip from story to story. And whereas I do mostly interviews, I mean, in the old days, I used to do segments. She would do mostly segments and every so often do an interview. I was fascinated by it. She's fantastic. She does awesome work. Fantastic work. Scott Ritter rules. You want to talk about Scott Ritter? You want to talk about Scott Ritter? Let's talk about Scott Ritter. In fact, I'll call this the backlash against Scott Ritter. And I should pull up the clip. In fact, let me pull up the clip now. Ritter is a fascinating guy. I love bringing Ritter on my show because he is very good when he, everything he says, he is infinitely confident about what he says, which makes really good radio, or for that matter, really good content. You can agree with him or disagree with him, but he is very bombastic in the way that he comes out with his statements. I appreciate that. And not just appreciate it, it's one of those things that I actually like about him, even when I used to bring him onto the radio show. Now, for the longest time, Ritter has been very strident against Israel. In fact, ever since I've known him, he's been very strident against Israel and his takes on what they've been doing, effectively opening a ghetto, in this case, committing a genocide. And I brought him on the show, I think this was last week. And as I brought him on, we were having a conversation. And Ritter went into what I call a super controversial point of view. And it confused me on air. And when you're confused on air, you're like, whoa, wait, what just happened? And I kind of engaged him on it, like, wait, Ritter, this is very different than your typical take on this issue. Now, to be fair, I do not know if Ritter is coming back on the show again. I have never seen a video that I have done with more dislikes or more comments that were just bashing him and going after him. If Ritter had seen this video, he may not come on my show again. So I don't know. I would say that his take altered significantly. And I know a lot of people are asking why. Now, in full transparency, several things are possible. In the best case, Ritter may take issue with the fact that Hamas was celebrating the fall of Syria. And understanding with the fall of Syria, what was going to come with that, with effectively another mini genocide taking place where these people are going door to door and ethnically cleansing Alawites, Christians, and other minority communities. And initially doing so on camera, but Jelani was like, hey, stop filming your atrocities, in which case they said, okay. And so they just do their atrocities without filming them. He can have feelings about that, especially considering it's like you're pushing for the liberation of Palestine. And these guys are out here celebrating the fact that this government has been overthrown and what is going to take place to the communities there. It could be that. The other thing could be what he said in regards to, okay, well, if Hamas is the fastest thing moving in regards to pushing back, when he pushes for Hamas, other people attack him for doing so. In which case he's like, okay, well, what is the real group here that we should be supporting? I think that's somewhat of a weaker argument. And the reason I think that's a weaker argument is because Israel has divided intentionally the PLO and Hamas and fed that wolf, as Joe Scarborough would say, with money being funneled to it because it wanted Hamas to be the face of resistance as opposed to, let's say, the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Meaning, Israel intentionally drove a wedge between these two political factions on purpose in order to create political division to prevent there being a cohesive narrative pushing against the Israeli occupation. So I think that's somewhat of a weaker case. The other case that I don't want to say, but I have to say it just because it's honest. It could be the fact that Trump is in office. And with Trump being in office, if you remember, Blinken took his passport. They were trying to prosecute Ritter. Like all of this stuff was effectively taking place. And does that have an effect on one's point of view when they give a political commentary and they want those things back? Meaning you want your passport back. You want this ability to be able to travel out of the country, maybe even to Russia. You want these things back. And criticizing Trump, especially if you're a high-level figure, may not necessarily be the best way to go about it. And what I mean by that is his take seems to be in line with what Donald Trump take is. It just does. Now, I don't think this is shocking for me to say, right? I mean, if you look at the comments, there were like 1,000, effectively many of which saying the same thing. So me not bringing this up doesn't necessarily help my case if I'm trying to be transparent and talking about it. By the same token, Ritter's take is his take. And to be bluntly honest with you, I have found myself, I'm not going to say having similar thoughts, but I found myself in this mindset of this doesn't change. Like this situation just goes on forever. It doesn't change. And how do you change this particular situation? You could say, okay, well, you need to put the screws to Israel. Okay, well, the United States is not really doing that. It's their colony, and they're using that colony to create this kind of greater Israel, where it's our pit bull in the Middle East. Or you can say Israel has a huge amount of influence in America. You can pick your pony in regards to which one you think it is, whether it's the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail. Either way, it is what is taking place on the ground. Ritter can defend his own point of view on that. And you can check out that video if you want to hear his point of view. I'm not necessarily going to play it because it was a long video and I don't necessarily know the spots that would be best because I wasn't necessarily thinking about doing this segment. But I like the guy. He is always welcome onto the show, whatever perspective or take that he has. I am not a stickler in regards to forcing people to take a point of view. You come on, you have your point of view, and we can discuss it. Hell, we can argue about it or otherwise. And even in that interview, I was pushing back on Ritter, effectively saying his main point was Gaza is not the most important issue. That something needs to be done effectively with the Palestinian population, and maybe we need to be open to additional options in this case. In which case, the audience flipped out. It's like, dude, they're committing a genocide. How are you saying this is not the thrust of the issue? And even going so far as to saying, well, Iran needs to get rid of all of its nuclear program. And as I pointed out, Israel literally has nukes. How are you making this argument that Iran should do this? He said, well, if they don't want to get hit with nuclear weapons, then, and it's like, so you really believe Trump's going to hit Iran with, like, some of the stuff I didn't buy it, and I guess I made it clear that I didn't necessarily buy it, but it felt like it was going in a particular direction, like it was in the Trumpian view of things, when that was not the view that he had prior. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. We will see. I would say I've never seen that many negative comments on the video that I've had ever. I've never seen anything like it. But I don't want to turn you on that because that wasn't necessarily something I was going to hit. I do want to go to something that is super interesting. So, you know, there were elections that were held yesterday. Some in Florida, one in Wisconsin. The one in Wisconsin was a Supreme Court seat. And that ended up being the most expensive race for a seat like that in the history of the United States. If I'm not mistaken, the number was like $100 billion or some insane amount of money. Elon Musk himself dropped in $26 million into that race. The Republican, Brad, Schimmel versus Susan Crawford, the liberal. And despite all of that money being dumped in by Elon Musk, hell, he even jumped into the place wearing a costume with a cheese thing on his head. Even with all that money, he lost. Brad Schimmel lost. The liberal ends up winning that race. Now, the reason why I'm fascinated by this, and the reason why I want to discuss this, is because it brings up a point that I've made over and over again about Musk being an albatross around Trump's neck. He's not a benefit. He's awkward. He's weird. And being awkward and weird, he is the richest man on the planet that is trying to talk to people and destroy the institutions that those people effectively use, being Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, firing all of these workers, having a chainsaw saying he's going to go after Social Security. Okay, so the world richest man, who is an aardvark, he's a weirdo in the way that he talks and engages people. That guy is going after the poorest, or at the very least, the lower middle class, and destroying lives. That is not a positive. Nor did I think the American public will see that as a positive. Him jumping into Wisconsin and dropping $26 million and giving out millions of dollars to people was not a benefit. He is an albatross around Donald Trump's neck. Even in the Florida races, Trump won those races overwhelmingly. And yet, the Republicans that won, I think it was like cut in half. Like, so let's say if Trump won it by 30, the Republicans won it by like 15. And now Democrats are like, hey, we have the wind at our backs. Okay, no, you don't. You do not. You're sitting at a 26% approval rating or 29%, 27, 29% approval rating, depending upon the poll that you choose. That is not necessarily you having things under control and you just, we're in the prime position. You still lost. But it's something to be said, though, that Musk is not a benefit. And dropping him into Wisconsin as if he's the nuclear weapon, he's the special option that is going to somehow change the context of this election. It did. All of the money that Musk put into that race, $26 million, and they still lost. Him jumping around on stage with the cheese hat didn't matter one iota. They still lost. He wasted all of that money. He could have given me that $19 million and would have had the exact same effect that it had in this particular race. It was a pointless endeavor. He is not a benefit. He is not a bonus. He is a liability. And Republicans, I think, have started to realize that Musk is a liability. In many cases, you've had articles where Republicans started sounding the alarm about Musk going after Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, effectively saying these programs are popular. These are third rails of politics. And whereas you may say, I'm only going after waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, well, when people see you firing all of these workers, when the times that it takes for you to make contact with a worker, and you associate that with Musk, and you immediately associate Musk with Trump, you have problems. Add to that, if the tariff war that Donald Trump is breeding is going to end up causing a recession, Trump's presidency is toast. His presidency is toast. Now, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Musk is trying to make this argument of, oh, we're super transparent. No, you're not. When the federal court tells you don't go into these records and you go into the records, okay, that's not super transparent. That's effectively ignoring the court system. There's something fundamentally wrong with this notion of a billionaire who've decided, yeah, I'm going to fire these workers. I'm going to go into these systems, even though I have no experience with any of these systems. I will go into these systems and I'm going to fire people and I'm going to, rework them and everything else. They are trying to make these programs dysfunctional with the notion of at some point saying, well, look how dysfunctional it is. Let's just privatize it. And there is zero political opposition. Cory Booker stood up there for what, 25 hours and 5 minutes or something, some ridiculous amount of time. I have no idea what Cory Booker was talking about. I have no idea what the purpose of what Cory Booker was even doing. He did a filibuster for over 24 hours. He beat Strom Thurmond's number. Okay, congratulations. But to what end? I have no idea. He was sitting there with a war criminal Gallant. No issue at all. Nobody tried to arrest him, even though there was an ICC arrest warrant out for him. Cory Booker, arm around him. There is a fascinating story about Cory Booker and Obama, where Cory Booker was getting so much money from the Israeli lobby that when Netanyahu came to give a speech and the Democrats didn't show up, the one Democrat that showed up was Cory Booker, because they told him, you better sit your ass down and listen to Netanyahu. You better clap, even though Netanyahu is effectively attacking your Democratic president. Just amazing. Liberal candidate wins the race. Now, to be fair, like I said, in Florida, the other Republican candidates ends up winning that race. Yeah, Booker's phony. He's so full of it. Booker is so full of it. I want to go to another story. Before my guess what time is. Okay, we have a few minutes. All right. Is it this one? So, they have been chucking people out the country illegally without due process. And when you point out to them, where's the due process in this? Like, how are you legally deciding upon, like, meaning day in court, the typical process that because look, in government, the only thing we have is due process, right? If the president just says, well, I'm going to do this. Okay, well, is the president legally allowed to do that? And if he is, there's usually a lawyer involved. There's usually a case involved. There's usually some steps that you would have to follow in order to ensure that the rights of the individual is ensured. Even if the person is a foreigner, yes, they still have certain rights. And especially if you're an American, or for that matter, if you're a green card holder or something to that effect, none of that stuff is being honored. They are chucking people into countries that they didn't even belong. I'm going to have to hit that story with somebody. I need somebody who can really dig into that story. Trump, for his side, and maybe I shouldn't have went there. I'm doing this in a weird way. Okay, I'll go to this one. The Houthis. Ansar Allah. Listen to this. Listen to this.
Commercial vessel.
She's puffing her chest out.
these Houthi strikes have been incredibly successful. Last time I was at this podium, there were more than 100 successful strikes. There have now been over 200 successful strikes against the Houthis. Iran is incredibly weakened as a result of these attacks. And we have seen they've taken out Houthi leaders. They've taken out critical members who were launching strikes on naval ships and on commercial vessels. And this operation will not stop until the freedom of navigation in this region is restored, which is a critical principle. And this president stands behind our Defense Department, who's doing a tremendous job.
This is nonsense. This is nonsense. They are doing strikes like this one. 3 reported killed in U.S. airstrikes on water infrastructure in Yemen. Okay, well, what does water infrastructure have to do with the Houthis, per se? You are just killing people. You're randomly hitting places, and you are just killing people. I have no evidence that they've been killing Houthi leaders or anything like that, short of women and children that they've been killing. And if they have been so successful, then how are Houthis, April 2nd, 2025, 10:53 a.m., Houthis launch fresh attacks on U.S. aircraft carrier, other warships in the Red Sea. How? Do tell. Are you so successful if indeed the Houthis are still launching strikes at your ships, where you are huddling your ships to get out of the range of those missiles and drones? This administration is so full of shit. Yes, you're bombing the Houthis, but keep in mind, Obama greenlit Saudi Arabia to bomb the Houthis. They did so for what, 6 to 8 years? Joe Biden bombed the Houthis. He did so for, I don't know, several months, trying to get them to stop firing missiles into the Red Sea. And now Trump has decided to do the exact same policy as Saudi Arabia and Joe Biden, neither of which have worked. And at some point, you need to stop stepping on that brake, Sideshow Bob. He is effectively bombing and killing people without necessarily damaging the military effectiveness or capability of the Houthis, as evidenced by them continuing firing shots at Israel or Tel Aviv, continuing firing shots at U.S. carriers in the Red Sea. And by the way, they are doing God's work. Understand, Israel is committing a genocide. And the idea that these other quisling governments, as Mark calls them, stand by and watch. We stand by and watch. And the Houthis took a principled position saying, we want that to stop. Nothing goes through the Red Sea until it stops. All right, you may not like that. That may be a pain in your ass. But it is a pain in the ass of the Muslims or the Arabs who are being subjugated by the Israeli occupation also. And their point is, under normal circumstances, the genocide is off the table. We thought that we stopped that after Nazi Germany, when we came to this recollection of never again will we allow this on this planet. And what's even wild about it, oftentimes we would sit here and think to ourselves, how could that take place? How on earth could the people be organized in such a way where they just wantonly slaughter other human beings? Well, here we are. This is how it takes place. Fascist government, a denigration of other human beings as if they're not real human beings. You have land, or you have something that these people, these fascists want, in which case they need to come up with a rationale in order to take it. You get other governments that lump in thinking, hey, it is a positive that we have this bastion of democracy in the Middle East, in which case we will fund and we will back them as they colonize the area. To make this even worse, there is an article out about al-Jilani. Al-Jilani apparently is doing back channel communications right here. Back channel communications with Israel. Back channel communications with Israel, with the idea of normalizing relations. Right here, scoop. The new Syrian government is engaged in efforts to establish back channels with Israel, a Syrian source with knowledge of the matter tells me. These efforts are aimed at laying a groundwork for potential normalization between Syria and Israel, and are taking place with the support of Saudi Arabia. Interesting. Interesting. So the jihadists that is supposed to be doing a Muslim caliphate, representing Islam, who wouldn't fire a shot at anger in Israel as it bombed Damascus, as it stole territory, more and more territory in Syria, when defended in the Middle East against them. They would defend it against Hezbollah. They would not defend it against Israel, are now making deals in order to come to some kind of political reconciliation with Israel. Because again, the jihadist was put in by Turkey, the US. He made agreements with the US in this case with the hope that they relieve sanctions. You got normalization, mind you, normalization as these people were murdering Christians, Alawites, and minority communities on camera, on film. Europe was normalizing relations. The ridiculousness of sexy Annalena Baerbock reaching out her hand and him looking at her like she, stinks. I'm not shaking your hand. You're a woman. A head chopper has taken over power in Syria. And Israel is like, yeah, we can normalize relations with a head chopper. Perfectly fine. They're not doing anything to us. Perfectly fine. The question, though, to what end? Now, Trump has a problem. And part of the problem, and Israel has a problem. Or let's say a question, a Palestinian question. What do you do with the Palestinians? You've bombed them, you've pushed them from to and fro, you've starved them, you've raped them, you've killed them, you've beat them, you've done any and every atrocity that you could imaginable to them, and they're still there. What do you do? Egypt doesn't want to take them. Jordan doesn't want to take them. Hell, if Egypt takes them, there's a belief potentially that the government may even collapse under the pressure and strain of you taking in Hamas, who's somewhat similar to the Muslim Brotherhood, a group that you effectively deposed with Morsi. Hell, my ex-wife and I went to Egypt, and when we went into the property, we were talking to the apartment owner. We asked the question, he misunderstood the question, and he thought we were asking whether it was safe for Aisha to go out basically wearing what she was wearing. And he says, we've gotten rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi is in a cage, we're going to chop his head off, he's dead. So the notion that they would want something similar to that back into the country, no. But what about Syria? What about Syria? Syria that is under sanctions, that is trying to normalize relations with the United States, would they be open to taking Gazans, meaning ethnically cleansing that area by evicting them into Syria? I don't know how you would necessarily do that. That seems to be a huge task with 1.58 million people. But if you're doing this in waves, you might be able to do it. Would Jelani accept it? Maybe, especially if he gets something out of the deal where he says, yeah, I would bring them into Syria, would normalize relations. I'm going to get money from the United States for funding and building and everything else in response to doing, or in coordination with doing so. The world is great, with the exception of the Gazans that were ethnically cleansed from the area. Israel, in that case, gets what it wants in regards to expanding into Gaza. The West Bank is a different matter, right? Yes, the settlers are trying to effectively cleanse that area, and they've been killing, beating, and everything else, the people who are in that region. But we should pay attention to this. This scoop is not random. And fact of the matter is, it literally could be just that. Oh, my guest is here. Great. All right. I want to go to my guests. We are joined with Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, oh, come on. There we are. Patrick Henningsen. He is a geopolitical analyst, journalist, host, I believe, of Sunday Wire. Am I getting that right?
Yeah,
Patrick?
host of the Sunday Wire and founder of 21stcenturywire.com. That's our main website.
Both of which are fantastic. I follow 21st Century Wire myself. Damn good publications, Patrick. Patrick, I put you on because you sent me a text, or I don't know what they call it, Twitter message, I guess, DM. And you pointed something out. And as I thought about it, I was like, he's right. It's a fantastic idea. Now, I haven't heard anyone else float it. And so you were talking in relation to these threats that Donald Trump is making towards Iran, effectively sending them a letter, you have 2 months, or else all hell is going to break loose, reiterating that, yes, I'm thinking about bombing Iran. You have all of the military forces, B-2 bombers, ships, all that stuff going into, I think it's called Diego Garcia, into that region where they're lining up with a massive show of force. Now, the Ayatollah has effectively told Pezeshkian no negotiations. Pezeshkian says, I'm aligning my position with the Ayatollah. And they pointed out, we cannot negotiate under the terms to which you are modeling. You're threatening us and expecting us to negotiate under threat. That's by definition a no, even though we would do this behind the scenes. So it's somewhat of a standoff. They think Trump is bluffing. A lot of people think Trump is bluffing, to be honest, because of the chaos that would erupt if indeed Trump does this. It is unpredictable in regards to what Iran response will be and the effect that it would have. Oil markets, just the world economy in general. Not to mention Israel. I mean, Israel may be the first target at that point, if indeed Trump does that. What is your plan? Give the audience your strategic vision in regards to the play that Iran may be in Iran's best interest that I haven't heard aired anywhere, but I think it's a good idea. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Jamal. Yeah, I think not just in Iran's interest, but the region's interest and also the interests of the world, and Israel's and everyone else's interest as well. My personal opinion, but some might disagree. But there's a stalemate here on this Iran nuclear crisis question. Okay, so the United States has come out threatened. Let's just be clear: the U.S. is threatening the Trump administration, threatening the Iranians with a preemptive strike. Okay, preemptive strike, and that infers that preemptive strike will be tactical, low-yield nuclear ground penetrating bombs or munitions. This is implied because this is what Donald Trump has already enacted in terms of the Pentagon preemptive nuclear doctrine. So it's in place. So one must infer that that is what he's talking about. Okay, preemptive strike. Why? If Iran doesn't come to the table and renegotiate the terms of its civilian nuclear energy program, and is supposedly the U.S. is heading off a potential threat of an Iranian, quote, breakout of nuclear weapons. Okay, so he's basically what Trump is asking the Iranians, saying, come to the table and renegotiate the JCPOA, the same joint Iran nuclear deal that the Trump administration tore up and threw in the bin in May of 2018. Okay, Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State, and he did so at the express command from Tel Aviv. This is well known. So Israel instructed Trump 1.0 to destroy the JCPOA nuclear deal 1.0. The deal that had Russia as a guarantor, the European Union as a guarantor, all the major Western powers, including the United States. It was working, had full transparency, and then it could be renewed after a period of time, 10 years or something like that. So perfectly good deal that everybody invested in, and Israel decided they want to take it away. Why did Israel do that? Trump said to the American people, it's a terrible deal, the usual sort of shallow talking points. It's a terrible deal. We're getting ripped off, the same BS. Okay. But anyway, it was good enough for the Fox News crowd and for, the Israeli lobby. They loved it. So he's basically saying, come back to the table, redo the JCPOA with a Trump stamp on it rather than an Obama stamp. And if you don't, we're going to annihilate your country. We're going to take out your leadership, and we're going to destroy your nuclear program, which is huge ramifications in terms of who knows what damage could be done, radioactivity, death and destruction, illness, long-term illness to Iranian citizens and people in the region, not to mention the destabilization if Iran launches a counterstrike, what that's going to mean for the Gulf states, for the U.S. bases in the region, all of this stuff, basically. So this is a problem. So how do we solve this problem? Well, there's a couple of issues that are fundamental. And Scott Ritter, former weapons inspector, very popular on social media and so forth, he's come out with this maximist realist argument that he's pushed that Iran must comply, otherwise the U.S. is going to destroy them. And Scott's saying dispassionately, supposedly, that this isn't, my preference. I'm just telling you how it is. Basically, submit to the will of America and Israel, or they will destroy you. So you'll be the end of your country, said Scott Ritter. So he's really echoing the sentiments of the Israeli lobby and the Trump administration on this, and Netanyahu. Okay, so Scott Ritter's basically the megaphone for that viewpoint. Okay, whether he wants to be or not, he says, well, I'm just being realist. He's taking a hyper offensive realist position. Okay, but the problem is, his argument is so fatally flawed on so many different levels, because when if you're a technician and you're just talking about pure power and military hardware and kit and bombs and yields and destruction and overwhelming superiority of power, that doesn't take into the account the political calculus. And if you understand international relations and you understand geostrategic international relations in history, okay, the final word is a political word. Any agreement, whether it's to avoid a war, whether it's after the war, any treaty, is all going to be through a political process. Okay, the United States is not an island among the world, in that they're one nation of many nations on the planet. So they must engage in the political process at some point, domestically and internationally. Okay, you can't get around this. And in politics, as von Clausewitz said, the famous war strategist, that war is an extension of politics by other means. Okay, so even the act of threatening and war, that is, if in fact, part of politics. And the main problem we have here is what's going to be the international reaction to the United States starting a war. What's going to be the reaction? And what's the price that the U.S. is going to pay for drawing a red line in history? That will be, first of all, the end of the Trump administration. Its legacy as a peace president, as a voice of the people, it'll be over. Trump will be filed in a category worse than George Bush, okay, in terms of a neocon, a complete failure as a president, a hypocrite, a liar, a warmonger, and somebody who initiated World War III and deployed nuclear weapons against a country that didn't have any. Okay? Didn't have any. Because there is no evidence that Iran has nuclear weapons. There's nothing. There's no evidence. They may have 60% enriched uranium, but this is not a war crime. They're even technically still within the parameters of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which Iran is a signature. But
Right.
Iran does not have to abide by the Non-Proliferation Treaty guidelines when they're being threatened by the United States, by Israel. They're under maximum pressure sanctions, which are an act of war, which are illegal under international law, by the way. It should be done through the UN, but they're not. The U.S. has waged economic war unilaterally. Okay, but put that aside for the moment. There's no evidence. So where are we here? This is exactly a rerun of the pre-Iraq War 2003 scenario, with a WMD accusation and no evidence, and a threat of war. So if you think about it, why would it, with the U.S. record, why would why would Iran trust the United States that if they allow inspectors, in which the Iraqis did, to look for weapons. Scott Ritter himself.
He was one of them.
He was one of
He
them.
was
So
one of them.
this is more baffling why he can't make this argument. He should be leading the argument that this isn't going to work and that the U.S. is not a legitimate party in the political realm. These things they can't be solved through pure force. It must be solved politically. And war is also part of that political equation, of course, but there's going to be a price to pay for that. So Iran has no incentive to comply because the Iraqis led in the inspections. The inspectors found nothing, and the U.S. bombed them, occupied them, and killed 1.5 million people anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so the record is not good, and that's the next door neighbor of Iran. So they're well aware of the U.S. So that, secondly, the genocide in Gaza, there was a ceasefire agreement. Trump rode in like the knight on a white horse at the beginning of his term. Oh, we've got peace in the Middle East. Thank you, Trump. Thank you, Steve Witkoff. Hurrah, hurrah. Okay, where is that ceasefire agreement now? They tore it up. They gave Netanyahu a green light to destroy it, to violate it, and Israel's bombing refugee tents as we speak. So that's null and void. So another agreement that the United States doesn't keep. Okay, so that's another one. Another example. The JCPOA itself. The JCPOA took 4 years to put together, with all of the stakeholders, all of the resources, all of the political capital that was sunk in that. And Trump came along and yanked it. So why would the Iranians want to go through this process again when anything that they maybe put on paper or agree with could be reversed by Trump in the next month? Or literally, he would change his mind on a daily basis. But maybe next month he'll change his mind. Israel changes his mind and they say, no, we're going to attack anyway. Okay. Or the next term or the midterms. Trump gets impeached after the next midterms, and then you've got somebody else in and they reverse it. Or a Democrat comes in and reverses it. It's possible, but it doesn't matter. It's just the U.S. is not agreement capable. The UN Security Council Resolution 2202 is another thing Iran could point to. That was the international binding implementation of the Minsk peace process by the United States. China voted, Russia voted. It was the only time the UN had a unanimous vote in the Security Council in 2015. And what did the US do? They intentionally sabotaged it. The French undermined it. They slow walked it. The Germans as well. And then now you have the war, which broke out in 2022 as a result of the failure of to implement and the intentional sabotage of UN Security Council Resolution 2202. So we're ticking off all these boxes one by one by one by one. So the US has no standing internationally to want to implement or force or compel or coerce anybody into some kind of an agreement, especially under threat of a military strike. So Scott Ritter and others, their argument fails. It also fails theoretically under basic negotiations game theory, because whenever there's a threat of future punishment or a threat of violence, the level of compliance to the sanctioning party or the party who's enforcing a type of punishment or coercive measure, the target nation, in this case Iran, the level of chance of compliance is almost zero. And this is according to all case studies in history and theoretical modeling as well. And I had to study this for international relations, so it's like required text. Not everybody's read it. Certainly nobody in the Trump administration has read any of these required texts, but previous U.S. diplomats were required to, because they couldn't be in the diplomatic corps unless they had the academic qualification and the background to understand some of these basic concepts.
Right.
Okay, this is why you don't put people like Pete Hegseth, who's a Fox News weekend host, to be in charge of the Pentagon and be making policy, because he doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know what he's talking about. And you can kind of see this is starting to come out now, that the world is not a TV show, or at least the world doesn't want to be a sort of extra ancillary actor in a TV show run by Uncle Sam. Okay,
Mhm.
and so having a Fox Weekend host as defense secretary who has zero experience is a bad idea. And now you're starting to see the results of this. Is there are no restraining voices or checks and balances within the Trump administration. So their foreign policy is a total free-for-all. So the other thing that this argument fails on, that Iran can't hit the U.S. back. They might be able to hit back their bases and damage all of their bases in the region. In Qatar and Saudi Arabia, in Israel has 2 bases, Iraq, Syria, okay, among others, Bahrain, okay, Kuwait has bases, UAE has bases. Those will all be hit by Iran, but the U.S. is safe. So that proves, and even Scott Ritter admits that Iran can't touch America. Well, if Iran can't touch America, how is Iran a threat to U.S. national security? It's not.
Right.
Why is the U.S. even in the region to begin with? It's in there. We all know why it's there. It's there to
Israel.
defend and provide a security umbrella for Israel. Okay, it's not there for the oil. The U.S. produces plenty of its own petroleum products, natural gas and oil. It's energy independent, effectively. Okay, so if it's not a threat, if Iran is not a threat, this is an Israeli interest. So the U.S. is acting explicitly on behalf of the interests of the state of Israel, not America. And this is proven by everybody's statements of intent and so forth. So that's interesting. So the U.S. is acting on behalf of a foreign country and then saying it's for their national security. That doesn't make any sense. This is a bad precedent for the international system. This is only going to end in tears. And the last thing is, why would Iran want to comply with any nuclear non-proliferation or compliance for weapons that they might have in the future? And of course, Iran could quickly put together a nuclear bomb maybe in a matter of weeks. If that's the case, fine, but they haven't. Even Tulsi Gabbard said in front of the Senate hearings that the intelligence assessment of the U.S. is that Iran does not have nuclear weapons and doesn't intend to produce them. That's their internal policy. Okay, but how can the U.S. then enforce that agreement? And we know that this is for the security of Israel, and not the United States. And Israel has an undeclared nuclear weapons warhead arsenal of between 100 and 300 nuclear warheads, and we can't determine the exact number because they will not allow any inspectors into Israel. They won't declare their nuclear arsenal. Okay, they won't declare it. So it's a secret, undeclared nuclear arsenal by which they can hold the region and the world hostage. Nuclear blackmail, nuclear extortion. Okay, that is actually the source of the problem, and that is the source of the Iranian grievance. Okay, that's the core issue. So my humble contribution to this problem is to offer a simple solution, which is that let's have a new JCPOA, and let's have Iran and let's have Israel both under full transparency, full compliance, under a new regional nuclear-free Middle East. That means that Israel must allow international inspectors in. They must come under the international regime, and they must disarm. And Iran will also disarm. Or the other option is Iran should be allowed to have nuclear weapons in the same way that Pakistan and India both have nuclear weapons, 2 foes geopolitically, 2 rivals, but who haven't attacked each other. It's created a balancing situation there. Okay, either they both give up their nuclear weapons or aspirations, or they both should be allowed to have them. And basic nuclear deterrence theory has shown that the 2 parties having nuclear weapons creates an offset and a balance of power. It's not ideal. So if you had to vote in the region, the majority of the Arab countries would certainly vote for a nuclear-free Middle East. Okay,
Right.
Not an increased nuclear Middle East. Okay, so that also means part of this agreement should be the United States must remove all of its nuclear weapons from the region, including Incirlik Air Force Base in Turkey, for starters, as well as the nuclear weapons that they have in their other bases in the region, and also Diego Garcia as well, which is within range of Iran, which the U.S. has already sent long-range bombers to Diego Garcia, which are nuclear enabled. So that's a fair solution, because we're not in the Cold War anymore. So the U.S. must admit that the Cold War is over. Okay, it's been 35 years or something like this. It's about time that we say, is there a Cold War or not? Because if there's not, the United States does not need to be in any of these various nuclear deterrent positions dotted around the Middle East, around Central Asia and the Indian Ocean and so forth, and maybe beyond that, to be quite frank. So, but this crisis is an opportunity to deal with these underlying issues. The main one being that Israel is being allowed by the U.S. to have a secret nuclear weapons arsenal, and that is contaminating any potential negotiations or peace in the region. And you cannot have that double standard. The U.S. cannot demand of Iran anything while they're allowing Israel to keep a full nuclear weapons arsenal that's completely out of the bounds of any international supervision or regulation or anything like that. I mean, it's unacceptable. But so that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. And I think this is an opportunity, firstly, for them to come basically out of the basement of Dimona and act like a normal country, to join the family of nations and not be a rogue state. That's up to Israel. And if it doesn't do that, the consequences for them and for the region, for Iran, for us, for everybody, could be disastrous. I really think this is a key issue that, if enough light is shed on it, that will help to ameliorate so many other problems, and we can finally have a reciprocity in policy, in negotiations, rather than this one-sided, lopsided conversation, which is currently, I think, destroying the region and will ultimately destroy the United States. It's already, look what it's done to NATO over Ukraine. Same type of thinking, same type of double standards.
Patrick, I agree with everything that just came out of your mouth. I love the analysis of it. 2 points. Rules-based order is just the double standard, right? Like the entire point of this notion of, oh, we're a rules-based order. They don't say international law. They say rules-based, meaning we set the rules, we change those rules anytime we want. So Trump will come in and blow off the JCPOA, or they will blow off the Minsk agreements, or they will get rid of the nuclear or missile treaties that they have with Russia. Or, like you said, he'll be a savior and comes in when he gets the ceasefire, when he tells the Muslim community, I'm going to end this war, and then allows Israel to violate it constantly over without saying anything about the fact that they're effectively violating it. So agree with everything that you say. I think the second point to that is, even if Iran does it, it's still good. Now, because I think it skewers this notion of, it's like, okay, we're willing to negotiate. However, on an international stage, we need to put Israel's nukes on the table as a talking point for us to discuss.
Yep.
Doing that by itself is a positive thing, right? It shines light on the fact that Israel has nukes, even though they don't necessarily acknowledge the fact that they have nukes. Now, Israel could say, well, we don't have nukes. Okay, well, everybody knows that they have nukes. It's an open secret that nobody necessarily says anything about, but they actually have them. I love the idea for that reason alone. That Iran is like, okay, we'll have a conversation about this. No, we're not trying to get nukes, but we'll have a conversation about this. As a prerequisite for this conversation, Israel needs to also go under the same model of nuclear inspection. Because you're right, the part of the reason that Iran may go towards a nuke has everything to do with the fact that Israel has nukes and lords it over all of the Middle East in regards to this kind of Samson option that if we're attacked, we will take everybody with us. Now, the catch becomes, would Israel, a country that is now committing a genocide, that is trying to ethnically cleanse an area, will they be willing to effectively give up those nukes? And with the US, who's been a biased actor all the way through, Donald Trump is not having a conversation with Iran. As you point out, this has nothing to do with Iran attacking the United States. This is everything to do with Donald Trump taking an Israel first policy and is effectively saying, we are going to effectively attack another country for Israel, which is outlandish, right? Like there's that is so wildly beyond the bounds of an American first president. You've effectively taken America into an unpredictable situation for the sake of a foreign actor that is committing atrocities. It's outrageous. And so there's a level of gamesmanship that needs to be played here by Iran by pointing out, we're willing to negotiate. Kind of like Putin. Putin is always, the consummate, we're going to kick ass. However, we are willing to negotiate. We're always willing to negotiate. And you're not wrong in saying that that is a fair proposal. Okay, you don't want us to get nukes. Okay, then why do you have nukes? And if we will go under a nuclear regime that you can check and test, inspect, and everything else, then we want the same thing to be applied to Israel. Now, Israel's going to balk. They're going to scream. They're going to complain. They're going to moan. But I don't think the U.S. is going to be an honest arbiter of this. I just don't. They haven't been an honest arbiter all the way through. But I do think it's a good idea for Iran to frame it in that way, to frame it to the world community. Hell, to even go to the UN. If I'm not mistaken, Iran took their case to the United Nations. That would have been a fantastic point to make in the United Nations, that we are willing to negotiate, providing that Israel.
They will. They will make that point. It's going to come. Yeah, the reaction I've gotten when I posted this peace plan or a peace option has been very positive from all the Iranian journalists and pundits that have reacted to it. Have said, yeah, we will go with that. The smart thing Iran could do would be to just enter into some kind of a protracted negotiations, because the Trump administration has been so sloppy. They fumbled the ball in Ukraine. Marco Rubio and this team of buffoons have fumbled the ball with the Ukraine negotiations. They fumbled the ball in Gaza so dramatically, and they're about to just completely burn themselves to smithereens over Yemen. And what they're doing with Iran right now is a joke. But with this record of fumbling, I'd definitely get on the pitch with them, Iran, and just basically run the Trump administration, run the clock out on Trump's administration, or the political patience or will within the United States, the tolerance of U.S. allies to basically give this much leeway to the Trump administration for screwing up just about every situation that they promised that they're going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. What a joke. Okay.
Yeah.
But the Trump administration is making the classic mistake in business. Okay. Business lesson to Donald Trump. Trump University Business 101. Never overpromise and underdeliver. That is the cardinal sin of business. Okay. You of all people should know that, President Trump. Okay. You are overpromising and under-delivering. And not only that, you're under-delivering, and then you're scapegoating other people for your mistakes, and then absconding from the conversation, not even making comments about it, leaving your minions to carry the can in what is completely a debacle. So what Iran should do is go to the United Nations, make this argument, and they will. They will make this argument. Watch, okay? But Israel, just by having a secret nuclear weapons arsenal, should be kicked out of the United Nations on that basis. Secondly, they should be kicked out for the genocide which they're committing against the native Palestinian population. So there's two perfectly legitimate issues and reasons to exclude Israel from the United Nations and to sanction it. That a UN General Assembly through United for Peace can now and should have done this 18 months ago. They should sanction a UN mandated sanction, not through the Security Council. They don't need to use the Security Council. Through the General Assembly, they have an option to sanction the state of Israel. Okay, and it will pass. It'll pass by unanimous margin. Okay. Just on the nuclear threat alone, if this issue comes to the surface in the discussion and the global South gets involved in this conversation, then basically that creates such a logjam diplomatically for the United States, because now the whole conversation's changed. It's all about how the US and Israel want to frame the conversation, which is really like through a keyhole.
Yeah.
Don't look at anything outside of this very small pinhole that we're offering for dialogue, for framing this conversation. That's what the US and Israel are doing. This is geopolitical gaslighting, basically. The US is in violation of international law on the basis that they've threatened Iran with annihilation, okay, and waged unilateral sanctions that are designed to create collective punishment, not just against Iran, but all the other countries that they do this to. So they're already in violation of international law, and it's not meaningless, because you can't go and basically pretend to be a player on the UN Security Council, and then you're violating international law all over the place to the detriment of untold number of countries, and then to stand up there and claim legitimacy that you're enforcing the nuclear non-proliferation bylaws of what Iran signed to. It's utterly ridiculous. Politically, in the international community context, it's untenable, basically. The United States is now outside of the international, quote, community, or even the UN family of nations. They have to resolve that eventually. Otherwise, why would any of these countries want to enter into any agreement, trade agreement, or anything with the United States? It's all breaking down. Donald Trump is presiding over the dismantling of American hegemony, which Biden did a beautiful job doing himself in 4 years.
Destroying, yeah.
And Trump is there to finish it off. That's what it looks like. It might not be what Trump's intending, but this is actually the effect of what he's doing. And until he or somebody in his orbit discovers like an active brain cell that they can see the widespread catastrophic damage that they're doing to the United States reputation and power and influence internationally, and basically pull back, hit the brakes, pull back, get rid of all these cowboys and social media posers in his cabinet that are all basically there because they were pre-approved by the Israeli lobby. They provided Trump with a list of candidates for cabinet positions. Anything that had anything to do with national security or foreign policy, they had to be extremely pro-Israel. And if they weren't, they're X'd off the list and disqualified. So the U.S. doesn't even have, Donald Trump, the White House, this government doesn't even have vetoing authority over its own cabinet picks. So no wonder these are the people running foreign policy, that we're having this dysfunctional foreign policy that's not just it's not only not in America's interest, it's not in the world's interest either. It's only in Israel's interest, but it's not really in Israel's interest.
Yeah,
it's doing tremendous damage to Israel by kowtowing to a Likud Netanyahu extremist fanatical agenda. It's the road to ruin. And until people realize this, including Trump's inner circle, that they're on a losing gambit on every conceivable level, and what they're pushing now with Iran is the ultimate, beyond the pale. This is not going to end well for anybody, and the U.S. will be blamed for starting the worst war in history. That's what's going to happen. So you see how negatively people look back at the Bush II administration, or Tony Blair over Iraq. Multiply that times 10. That's the legacy of Donald Trump. That will be the legacy of Donald Trump globally. That will be etched in global world history. There's no path to glory at all.
I think Trump is amoral to the truth. Meaning, I don't think he cares. He just says whatever he says to say to get from point A to point B. So if he says, I'm gonna value my administration by the wars I end, not the wars I start. Okay, well, he's starting and threatening multiple wars, right? He's attacking Yemen in the same way that Joe Biden attacked Yemen, the same way that Saudi Arabia attacked Yemen. None of them got results. In fact, I have this article where they were hitting water infrastructure. It's like, okay, well, that's not hitting military bases, despite the fact that they would come out and say, we're destroying the Houthis and we have damaged Iran and destroying the Houthis. Okay, none of that's true, right? They were literally launching rockets today at the U.S. aircraft carriers, meaning these are not honest, reasonable actors where they seem to care all that much, even under the Biden administration. As I point out, the rules-based order was effectively rules for us, different rules for you. The entire premise of the Ukraine war is ignoring the fact that when the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, we were willing to end the world for our own security. And yet, when we're on the Russian border, we blow it off that we have expanded NATO to their border, meaning these are not honest people. These are not honest actors. What your plan is effectively saying, look, we need to have some level of ethical honesty in the way that we look at world events and world behavior. Otherwise, we are going to go into utter and entire ruin. I agree with you 1,000%. I just don't know if you're going to get that out of this administration. I
don't expect I'm going to get it. But as you said, Jamal, just by raising the issue, if it becomes part of the conversation, reciprocity, this then transmutes the rest of the discussion. It changes the paradigm irrevocably. So, and you also said something that's true at the beginning of this conversation. You said the rules-based international order is just a pneumatic device or a talking point to subvert actual international law.
Yes.
Okay. A country itself can't function without laws. I mean, you need laws. There needs to be something to lean on in order as an organizing principle, okay, whatever that law is. And likewise, the international community to avert things like what happened in World War II. This is why they put in an international system after the Second World War, because that state of anarchy, which Germany took advantage of and other great powers took advantage of, literally nearly obliterated the life on this planet. Okay. Had they all had nuclear weapons in the Second World War, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. So there was an international system, flawed as it may be, okay, hijacked by special interests and oligarchs as it might have been, okay, it's still a working system to iron out international grievances. So you have to make an attempt in good faith to abide by international law. Otherwise, how can you then lecture and expect anyone else to do it or to basically submit to your collective authority, be it the UN Security Council or whatnot, okay? The US is basically trying to do an end run around all of that. But back to Trump, and this is an important point, okay? This talking point that Donald Trump didn't give us any wars in his first term is a total lie, okay? It's a complete fabrication. Donald Trump, he might not have officially started any new wars, although he did one that people don't acknowledge. But he didn't do anything to stop this brutal war against the Yemenis that Obama began in 2015. Trump just kept on going, basically a proxy war using Saudi Arabia and the UAE as American proxies to try to destroy Ansar Allah in Yemen and partition the country. Okay, like they've partitioned other countries, like Sudan, for instance. Okay, so Trump didn't do anything to stop that. That was an illegal, undeclared war of aggression that caused one of the worst famines in recent history. Okay, that's Trump. Second thing, Trump put boots on the ground in Syria, of which the U.S. is still occupying through the Biden administration and still into the Trump administration. So that was a complete lie. He began the occupation of Syria, okay, and U.S. occupying illegally 25% technically of Syria's landmass using their proxies, the Kurdish forces. Okay, there's another one. Donald Trump arguably gave us October 7th through the forced insistence of the Abraham Accords. Okay, so that he sold as he brought peace to the Middle East. He didn't bring peace to the Middle East. He accelerated October 7th, another big L for Trump. Okay, it's another L, tearing up the JCPOA. It's brought us to the brink of World War III. That's a huge L on the part of Trump. It's brought us closer to more escalation in war. Trump provided lethal weapons to the Ukrainians when Obama didn't. So Trump helped to accelerate the war in 2022. Donald Trump. So he's got a whole rack of L's in terms of war. One more, Jamal. Okay, and this is the piece de la resistance of the whole list. Okay, Donald Trump, in all his infinite wisdom and bombast, had the gall and the gumption to stand there in front of a crowd in 2019 and brag that he prevented the Syrian Arab Army and their coalition from a counter offensive against the Al-Qaeda occupied Idlib province in Syria in 2018.
Right.
Trump said, I saved the people of Idlib. They were going to kill, Assad was going to kill 3 million women and children. Just total BS. Okay. He publicly boasted about it. That was Julani, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra occupied, ISIS occupied.
Yes.
And Trump admitted there were 30,000 terrorists there, and he saved them.
Yep.
He saved them because he said, I was also saving the children. That was the Russians, the Syrian Arab Army, Hezbollah, Iranian Quds forces, Hashd al-Shabi. They all were prepared to basically retake Idlib.
Yep.
Because Trump, Abu Trump saved Private Julani. Saving Private Julani. You'd make a great Hollywood film. Abu Trump saving with a turban, Donald with a turban, saving Private Julani. Because Trump saved Private Julani, HTS Al-Qaeda marched into Damascus and are occupying, former ISIS and Al-Qaeda leaders occupying one of the most important countries in the center of the Middle East because Donald Trump saved him.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have happened.
If killing people now.
What Trump did was he threatened to bomb Damascus in Syria, and then Turkey used Turkey as a foil. Turkey came in and said, we'll help deal with the terrorists in Idlib. And of course, Turkey stabbed Syria in the back, and the rest is history because Turkey had, Turkey had no intention. So the U.S. played to, they basically made a huge threat, which Syria had to take seriously because the U.S. has already attacked Syria twice. Okay, so they took it on good faith. So did the Russians. The U.S. and Turkey stabbed them in the back to allow Al-Qaeda to defeat the Assad government forces and march into Damascus and take over the country. So now you have an Al-Qaeda occupied Syria, and nobody in Washington has a word to say about it. They're all mum about it. In fact, they want to normalize relations with Jolani. Okay. So all these people that the Republicans and conservatives, Sharia law, Sharia. That's a Wahhabist regime, unelected terrorist regime that's in charge in Damascus, implementing the most extreme form of radical Islamist law in sectarianism, running programs, killing Alawites and Christians, and nobody in Washington wants to say a damn word about it because Israel doesn't want them to say anything about it because Israel is very happy with the results because Israel has used the Al-Qaeda invasion of Syria to take over the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon and to cut a strategic pathway all the way to Iraqi Kurdistan via Al-Tanf and Bukamal in these areas. That's the path to attack Iran. That's the big airstrip that Israel is attempting to cut through Syria, and they're getting it with U.S. help. You see, this is what the game is, and so they're not telling you the game publicly, but behind the scenes, that's the game. So this is all this posturing and threats and virtue signaling by the Trump administration and all this rhetoric about it's radical Islam, this and that by the right in America. It is all theater. It's all theater for the benefit of Israeli interests and to prepare for a war or to attack the Islamic Republic of Iran. Full stop.
They put a head chopper in power, and they have been going door to door, murdering Alawites, Christians, any of the minority communities. I think the number's up to like 60,000. At one point, they were videotaping their atrocities. Al-Jilani was like, hey, stop videotaping your atrocities. It looks bad on us. It's like, who will stop videotaping atrocities? No,
Nothing to say. Nothing to say from Washington. They're completely silent about it. That is the biggest shame for America, and that I'll lay that at the feet of Donald Trump. He's Abu Donald. You're responsible for saving.
And by the way, Europe is also normalizing relations with them. I mean, like, it's astonishing. As they were committing all of these atrocities, Europe is out there normalizing relations. Look, I agree with everything you said with the exception of one thing, which I would put an asterisk beside. You're right. Donald Trump was sending offensive weapons to Ukraine. But at the time, he was under a remarkable amount of pressure, as being said that he was working with the Russians and got elected by the Russians. And he was doing any and everything in his power to say, that's not true, in which case it was even like, okay, I'll send weapons.
That's why they did it. That's why
I'll put an asterisk by that one. Yes, you're right, but I'm putting an asterisk by that one.
He caved to the pressure because he was under political pressure. That shows you the power of politics. That coercion worked on the Trump administration. That's just politics. But
Agreed.
I see the asterisk, Jamal, and
I put an asterisk, even though I agree with everything you said.
I acknowledge.
Let me ask you this: why doesn't the UN? Because you're right, the UN does have the power to effectively sanction Israel. It doesn't have to go through the UN Security Council. Why don't they do it? Is it just America's a Goliath? Because from my point of view, I agree with you that there is something to be said about standing there dictating while not living up to the standard that you're effectively setting. Like when Vance goes to Europe and is like, you guys are full of censorship, you are destroying elections. And then when you get back here, they are chucking people out of the country for the social media posts.
Complete
It's an issue of power. From my point of view, it's power. It's not about what's fair. It's not about what's right. It's about what do you have the power to effectively do. Why don't the UN get involved in this?
Because there's a lot of blackmail and coercion threats behind the scenes at the UN. We saw that in the run up to the Iraq War. That was the basis for this Official Secrets, the famous film about GCHQ whistleblower Catherine Gunn, starring Keira Knightley. This really shows you what sort of games were going on between the US and Britain, especially coercing, blackmailing, eavesdropping, spying, all sorts of things to capture the key bandwagon diplomats of bandwagon countries. There's a few countries that can bring votes with them. Okay, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in South America, Latin America, and so forth. So if you can capture and secure the loyalty of the bandwagon countries, the influencers within the international continental makeup, then you can more or less prevent certain things from getting tabled, things from getting heard. Now, if it's put up to vote, all bets are off at that point. And if you look at the recognition of the Palestinian state in UN General Assembly voting turnout on that, it's obvious that Israel doesn't have that many friends in the international community. They only have countries that will basically bend to their will of threats, coercion from the United States, because the U.S. can sanction, they can cancel trade deals, they can ruin, they can withhold loans. We saw what Joe Biden did with Ukraine. You know, openly boasted that he was going to withhold a $1.5 billion loan. That type of international racketeering that we saw with Biden, because he's just absent-minded, and he was kind of full of himself at that CFR junket that he was speaking at. So it came out.
That prosecutor or else. Yeah.
But that's business as usual behind the scenes. Those are very real threats that are issued to all of the other countries by the U.S. or by intermediaries, or done with a wink and a nod through there's spying and there's intelligence gathering against some of these countries. So the British, the French, the Americans, they are thick like thieves at the UN. And so they do the bidding ultimately of Israel. And by the way, look at the relationship between France and Israel has been completely blown open following the JFK file release. And we see that it was France that built the nuclear reactor and the nuclear facility for Israel to produce the weapons grade material and information that it stole from the United States. So France could not have had a civilian nuclear power program France could not have had a nuclear weapons program that got it a seat at the UN Security Council without Israel stealing that from the United States. And Israel could not have had the nuclear reactor without the French. In fact, the French tested Israel's nuclear weapons in the Sahara, in southern Algeria, and also in the South Pacific. That's how Israel got their weapons without having to themselves test them. The French did it for them. It was under the cover of French nuclear testing. This is all like out. Actually, we've got a great report, one of many reports on 21stcenturywire.com on this very topic this week, which people can go to our website and see. But I mean, so just you can see the level of complicity and the kind of conspiracy, if you will, between France and Israel, the United States and Israel, and between that and Britain. And this is an incredible kind of cluster of interests there that are not above board, because they're all connected to Israel that's doing everything under the table. And that's the problem. That's contaminating all of these negotiations potentially for peace in the region. And haven't the people of the Middle East had enough? Haven't they? When are we going to lift the yoke and the sword from their neck? And when is Israel going to join the normative family of nations and start behaving like a normative country, not an apartheid state with a secret nuclear weapons arsenal? That's just, there's no place for this in the 21st century. Donald Trump should be the first president to break the mold on this. But at the moment, he's not. He's completely owned by the Israeli lobby. He's like a dog on a leash of the Israeli lobby. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And now they're going after students for fake anti-Semitism accusations or pretending they're pro-Hamas when they're really just protesting for Palestinian human rights, for an end to the slaughter of women and children. And the U.S. disingenuously, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, are forced deporting these people who are there perfectly legally in the United States for opposing a genocide in Gaza. It's just, this is totally insane. Do they think that they're going to make out in the annals of history well on this? No, they're not. They're going down in history with every single other despotic regime. That's where Trump is headed. I'm sorry to say, but that's where he is headed if he doesn't change course. And the attack on the First Amendment, the attack on the U.S. Constitution, which is what the Trump administration is doing, they are taking on the First Amendment head on behalf of a foreign country. That is unforgivable and the most un-American thing you could possibly imagine. And draping it in the stars and stripes is frankly disgusting.
Agreed.
And I can't believe they're being allowed to get away with it, especially from real conservatives, from libertarians. They should be up in arms about this. And the left, quite frankly. Total silence from the Democratic leadership on this. I can't believe it, honestly.
The Democrats have been shattered after the election. I mean, they have organized all of their productive energies, not around policy, but to just be anti-Trump. And, they tried to put a bullet in him. They tried to put him in jail. They tried to do all of this stuff. And at the end of it, he won. They shattered like a glass vase on the floor. And as for the conservatives, I am not, look, I got to be honest with you. I'm not a firm believer that partisans, people who are partisan, are honest actors. In the same way when you would get liberals, when Joe Biden is committing a genocide, they'll be like, shh, don't say anything about the fact that Joe Biden is committing a genocide because we have to beat Trump. Okay, that is not the typical position. If that was happening under a Republican administration, they would be up in arms. They would be screaming to high heaven, oh my God, I can't believe that this is taking place. Same thing with conservatives in this case. It's like they will back their guy, and they will back their guy for political reasons, and it doesn't matter. They're okay with this anti-Semitism canard.
Witch hunt. Witch hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a witch hunt.
Yeah, it's a witch hunt. That's what it is. I mean, the notion that you would chuck somebody out of the country for a foreign actor, and you would use stuff like, well, we found a social media post that we didn't particularly like. Or you get Johns Hopkins University saying, if ICE agents comes in to take people away, don't get involved, Don't help them leave. Don't do anything. Just bow your heads and allow them to do it. Okay, again, this stuff is cowardice, witch hunts, all for a foreign actor. It is radically anti-American in the way that it's operating. And as you pointed out, it is done in the guise of being, I'm a pro-American president. I'm America first as the catchphrase. It's outrageous.
But just by the way, that hurt the Democratic Party in the 2024 election.
It decimated them, yeah.
It really damaged them. So that became an issue for the Democratic Party. Ultimately, they unraveled as a result of that. It wasn't the only issue, but it was, I think, a critical issue. The same reason the Trump administration, the MAGA movement, will be undone by Trump's and Rubio's attack on the First Amendment. It will be their undoing in the midterms as well as the next election. Okay, it will be their undoing if they continue down this road. It is going to end in tears for the Republicans, and it's going to bring a level of delegitimacy to this White House, to this party, that maybe they didn't intend or didn't expect they would ever have, because they were posing as the champion of the First Amendment, of free speech. And now they're basically attacking what not even their political enemies, but people that are opposing a foreign country that's in the international courts of justice for genocide, and whose leader has an arrest warrant with the International Criminal Court. These things weren't just made up out of thin air. It's all based on very heavy, thick, and growing by the day cases of evidence against Netanyahu, his cabinet, the IDF, all of their generals and soldiers who are committing war crimes by the minute as we speak. And there was a ceasefire. I should remind people once again, Trump came in, to his credit, there was a ceasefire, but that ceasefire it looks very disingenuous now. It looks like a pause to rearm the Israelis so they can continue not just killing Palestinians, but now the open policy of ethnic cleansing. They're saying forced, migration out of Gaza. Trump has now adopted this publicly. Migration out, that's ethnic cleansing. That's a violation of the highest level of international law and norms. That's the basis of the UN Charter. That's a total violation. Okay. So the US has no standing at all in the world to insist any country do anything that has any moral or ethical or legal basis, when in fact they are basically endorsing the mass murder and forced ethnic cleansing under threat of death of a native the Palestinian population. There's no standing whatsoever. So, I mean, that's the way the world sees it. But in the US, we're allowed to have cognitive dissonance about these issues. And then the government's testing the cognitive dissonance. And if they can get compliance or not, you see. And they're getting compliance on the free speech issue. You see? So, and that's a problem. It's a bigger problem under Trump than under Biden, because at least there was opposition under Biden. There's hardly any opposition under Trump on the right or the left. That's more dangerous than under Biden.
Patrick, you've been fantastic. And we have an amazing crowd that has been loving this conversation. I really thank you for this. And you are welcome back anytime. Patrick Henningsen, he's a geopolitical analyst, journalist, host of SundayWire.com, and also creator of 21st Century Wire. Both are fantastic. Is there anywhere else that people can find you?
Just, go to our website. All of our content every day is there. There's a lot of great articles, analysis. And then we have 2 shows, the Midweek Wire, which is Wednesday, live in a couple of hours, and then Sunday, the Sunday Wire, which is every Sunday. So long discussions, usually on a single topic. And check us out there at 21 Wire as well on Twitter, X, at 21WIRE.
Fantastic conversation, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You have a good one. Be safe. Oh, he is fantastic. He is fantastic. The audience is saying, bravo, bravo. Let's go to the chats. Let's see, Mr. Riffley. Might Russia use the Ukraine victory to drive the U.S. out of the UN Security Council? How do you do that? those people are members forever, from my understanding. The U.S., what is it, the U.S., Russia, France, Britain are permanent members of the UN Security Council. I don't know if you can drive them out like that. Papa Onaya Shelley, white dudes with money be the American first haters. They're not American first haters. I mean, it's just a hard argument to make that what Donald Trump doing is America first. Like, if America is principled on the issue of the First Amendment, and they are going after universities for students protesting. Okay, protesting is American as apple pie. How are you going after Americans for this? How are you using this guise of anti-Semitism as a fig leaf in order to basically a contrived canard to go after these students who, again, are protesting a state that is committing a genocide? It's not about Jews. Nobody said Jews. We're saying Israelis committing a genocide. And, you know, when you get to this thing of chucking people out the country, people with green cards, Marco Rubio, what is it, Mahmoud, I forget his last name, chuck the guy, or the very least is trying to kick the guy out of the country. He had every right to be here. Rubio tried to use the fact that he had a travel visa or something like that when he got here as a justification to pretend as if he didn't have a green card. Like, this stuff is outrageous when you think about it. And so none of this is America first. Even these threats against Iran has no capability of hitting the United States. They are not threatening us. We are threatening them. There's a difference in those things. And yet Trump is talking about using potentially even nukes to effectively attack a country on behalf of Israel. It would have to be on behalf of Israel because, again, it's not for us. Iran wasn't threatening us. So, you know, I don't think it's a white dude thing. I just think this administration has come up with a political catchphrase, every bit as much like Obama, hope and change. In their case, it's America first, while doing something radically opposite of that America first policy. Yeah, they're going to go down in history as goons. Thank you, Jamal, for your continued excellent reporting and commentary. Dino Panolucas, I think I got that right. I'm bad with names. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. We have one more. Alexander G. Trump totally betrayed the anti-war voters. Not just the anti-war voters. He betrayed his own voters. Like, think of all these people. What is the comedian name? I can't think of the comedian's name. Who said something like, if Donald Trump attacks Iran, I'm going to apologize for the rest of my life. And it's like, but dude, how did you not see that? I mean, he had already said he was going to have a pressure campaign against Iran. This was something he openly said during the election. And despite him saying, yes, you know, judge me by the wars I end, not the wars I start, and immediately starting wars, right? And so, yeah, I feel you on this. I mean, it's betrayal. It's not just betrayal to the anti-war voters. It's betrayal to America in general. Who voted for him to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? Who voted for him to fire tens of thousands of workers out of all of these organizations? Who voted for him to end up with a tariff war around the globe that most likely is going to cause recession in the United States? Nobody voted for that. What people voted for was under this guise of, we believe Trump will be better for the economy than Joe Biden. Trump gets in and trashes the economy, which is what he is effectively doing, and not just trashing the economy. Put that goofball aardvark, Elon Musk, in a position of authority where he's hopping around the White House like some, you know, prancer and destroying the richest man on the planet, going after the poorest people in this country, going after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, firing workers, people who have government jobs under the guise of waste, fraud, and abuse. I will tell you, my main issue with Donald Trump, even in the beginning, was that he was a flagrant liar. And habitual liars are very dangerous in political office because they can make up anything and they can use it as a rationale to move forward while going under the context of a lie. So you would get George Bush saying, it's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation. It was torture. But legally, they could say enhanced interrogation, and they could operate as such. The courts may get involved at some point, but at the point where the court gets involved, that's after the fact, when the policy has effectively been enacted. The destruction of the Department of Education. Oh, we're doing this to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And firing tens of thousands of people, and you believe that's waste, fraud, and abuse? I can tell you, Social Security was already a system under strain. Already didn't have enough people that were working there for the organization. And so this notion that you're firing all of these people, there was no review, there was no, patient, steady, thoughtful, okay, where's the waste? Where's the fraud? Where's the abuse? And we are taking, let's say, maybe 6 months to a year in order. It wasn't that. You had a rando billionaire who doesn't care about that particular system because he doesn't need that system, just gutting it, just completely gutting it and creating chaos for the people, poor, by the way, who need that system. It's outrageous. Nobody voted for that. I'm saying it was an outright betrayal, not just on the anti-war front, but on the America First front and for Americans in general, whether you voted for Trump or not. Outright, entire, complete betrayal. That's what this administration has been. That's what this administration has been. And now we're going with this thing of Liberty Day. Liberty Day being the day where Donald Trump initiates all of these tariffs across the world. We will see God damn it. Okay. Apparently Esteban will not be joining us. He's at the last minute gave a heads up saying, hey man, I had another appointment. I'm going to be super annoyed if I see him on somebody else's show at 9 a.m. talking about the same subjects that we were supposed to be talking about on my show. I'm very annoyed. Very annoyed. All right. Fair enough. Let's pivot. Trump, as I pointed out, today is Liberty Day. Right here. Liberty Day. This is what he's calling it. So we'll call it that. By the way, KJ will be here 9:30. KJ is fantastic. So Trump's Liberation Day, go into effect immediately, White House says. This is going to take place all around the world. Trump has decided that tariffs is the weapon of choice that he wants to use when he's engaging other countries. All right. So he's sitting here and listen to what he says about Putin and the war. Because look, from the Russian point of view, they have no reason to stop the war. Meaning they are pursuing their objectives on the battlefield. Under no circumstances do they trust the United States. And as such, why would they enter into some kind of ceasefire agreement that would purely just allow the Ukrainians to build up more weapons, build up more arsenal, arrest their people, pull more, in this case, teenagers into the front? Why would they do that? They are proceeding with what seems to be an offensive that is brewing. That is going to be brutal. I mean, they've been taking more and more territory. So Trump comes out and says this. Okay, wait a minute. I can't hear that reporter. So let's try this again. Okay, there we are. Let's try this one more time. Trump comes out and says this.
How serious are you about imposing oil sanctions?
No, I want to see him make a deal so that we stop Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and other people from being killed. But mostly it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. They're losing at least 2,500 human beings, beautiful human beings, a week. And I want it to stop. And some people would say, why do you worry about Russian soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers? I worry because it's like, they're just like you people. They're like us. There's like all of us. And I seem to have an ability to do those things. And if I can do that, I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do, and I think we will. No, I want to make sure that he follows through, and I think he will. I don't want to go secondary tariffs on his oil, but I think, it's something I would do if I thought he wasn't doing the job.
Secondary tariffs. I hope you hear what he said. This idea that if Russia isn't pulling through, quote unquote, whatever the hell that means, that he would initiate secondary tariffs. What's notable about that is there's nothing he can do militarily to change the context of the battlefield. And the secondary tariffs would effectively, let's say if it's on Russian oil, will be on China, India, Saudi Arabia, meaning any and everybody that is getting a product from Russia, let's say like oil, would effectively get hit under Trump's logic by a tariff, which means he would be putting tariffs on the entire world. The energy costs would spike immediately, which is why the Russians think he's full of shit on this. This is a problem in dealing with somebody who is dishonest and who you can't necessarily trust. They believe there is no way he's dumb enough to do something like this. Now, who knows? Maybe he is. He is willing to put tariffs on the world now, despite the economic consequences that is going to be felt by America. He said, I don't care about these economic consequences that are going to take place. Okay, I will tell you that these are things that destroy presidencies. If you take a policy that is somewhat risky, meaning Trump is sticking his neck out on this policy, and it comes back where people are damaged, people are hurt, you've already fired like 100,000, if not more, people from federal service and federal work. What are they going to think in the midterms? What are they going to think in the next election? Now, Donald Trump doesn't have the capability of running for another election again, but there will be another Republican. And in the same way, you had Obama, who ran under this notion of hope and change, and people didn't feel like they got their hope and change. And 30% of those people that voted for Obama turned around and voted for Trump. That is a death knell, or it was a death knell for Hillary Clinton. He is taking extraordinary risk. And again, I think the key point is nobody voted for any of this. This is not what people voted for. I didn't vote for Trump, so this is not on my conscience. I didn't vote for Kamala Harris either, so she was not on my conscience either. I didn't vote for either. But I know there are people that voted for him thinking, I had more money in my pocket when Trump was in office the first time around. Donald Trump gave me a check. I don't like the fact that Democrats are backing a genocide, meaning there were various reasons why those people decided they didn't necessarily want to go for the Democrat. Democrats are offering nothing. It seems like she's an empty suit. It seems like she's offering nothing. She seems to be just a female Joe Biden. These were legitimate reasons and gripes. Also, you had effectively a habitual liar who said whatever you needed to say to get from point A to point B. And those things are found to be lacking. Will he be punished for that stuff? Personally, I think he will be. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But I think he will be. This is, I need to get some out on Qatar Gate. So they've been having this conversation about JFK files. And you heard Patrick bring it up himself about the JFK files and how the information that's being released from those files and the people who they indict and everything else. This is Oliver Stone giving testimony. Now, if you remember, Oliver Stone did the movie on JFK. It was a very controversial movie on it in regards to the people who he implicated or he thought had some level of blame associated with it. Oliver Stone is giving testimony. Listen to what Stone is saying. I really need to get somebody on these files because these things are super interesting.
I asked the committee to reopen what the Warren Commission failed miserably to complete. I ask you in good faith, outside all political considerations, to reinvestigate the assassination of this President Kennedy from the scene of the crime to the courtroom, which never happened, but which means the chain of custody on the rifle, the bullets, the fingerprints, the autopsy that defies belief, and that if it were a murder, we'd have given to the poorest man dying in a gutter. Let us reinvestigate the fingerprints of intelligence all over Lee Harvey Oswald from 1959 to 1960, his violent death in 1963. And most importantly, this CIA, whose muddy footprints are all over this case, a true interrogation. James Angleton, before he died, who was one of the original members of the CIA, was talking about Dulles and Helms and the others, what he called the Grand Masters. And he's a Catholic. Angleton was a Catholic in search, perhaps, of repentance before his death. He did say, quote, if you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you had to believe would deservedly end up in hell. I guess I will see them soon. This is our democracy. This is our presidency. It belongs to us. Treat us with respect. Thank you.
Wow. The idea that they kept those files secret for like 60 years and then say, by the way, there's nothing to see here, folks. Just trust us. And then when the files are released, all of these tidbits start coming up in the files. Here's another bit of testimony that took place. I'm going to flip over to this one.
2023, the CIA action reporting simply didn't give me a clear answer to the question, who killed JFK? What was clear over time is a new fact pattern. In the spring of 2023, the CIA fully declassified for the first time its pre-assassination file on Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin who denied killing the president and was killed himself in police custody before he could defend himself. I have a copy here of the CIA's pre-assassination file on Lee Harvey Oswald, and I'm submitting it for the record. The declassified Oswald file runs to, and fact checkers can confirm this, 198 pages. In the fall of 1963, in November of 1963, this file was held in the office of James Angleton, counterintelligence chief at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, not 5 miles from the White House where President Kennedy lived and worked. To be sure, the declassified Oswald file is not a smoking gun. I showed it to journalists whose judgment I trust, and they shrugged. They said, this is evidence of incompetence. CYA, they said, cover your ass. I didn't quite believe that, but I couldn't prove them wrong until March 18th. That was the day that the National Archives began posting long secret JFK assassination records that had been withheld from public view for decades. I started by looking at 9 declassified documents about Mr. Angleton. He was the man who compiled the Oswald file. And when I came to a long secret transcript of Angleton's testimony to the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978, my reservations about passing judgment on the responsibility vanished. One newly declassified passage showed that Angleton had lied under oath about his surveillance of Oswald's correspondence while he lived in the Soviet Union from 1959 to 1962. And that, for me, was a tipping point. The transcript, which the CIA withheld from public view for half a century, confirmed a disturbing fact. James Angleton is the 3rd senior CIA officer known to have lied under oath about what they knew about the alleged assassin Oswald before JFK was killed. The first was Deputy Director Richard Helms. He lied to the Warren Commission in May 1964 when he said under oath the CIA had only, quote, minimal information about Oswald before JFK was killed. 198 pages of information cannot be truthfully described as minimal. The second CIA officer who lied was George Joannides, chief of the Covert Action Branch of the Miami Station in 1963. His agents in the top secret AMSPEL program generated propaganda about Oswald's pro-Castro activities both before and after the president was killed. 15 years later, in 1978, the CIA inserted Joannides into the House JFK investigation, and he blocked any investigation of contacts between Oswald and his AMSPEL agents. Obstructing Congress cannot be considered evidence of incompetence. And this is what I believe in summary. One false statement might be incompetence. A second false statement might be CYA for the first false statement. But 3 false statements by top CIA officers about Kennedy's accused killer, that is a pattern. It's a pattern of misconduct. It's a pattern of malfeasance. If 3 police officers lie about their knowledge of a homicide defendant, that cannot be considered exculpatory evidence. To the contrary, it shows guilty knowledge and criminal culpability. It is, in a word, incriminating. The new fact pattern leads to a new conclusion. We know now what they knew about Oswald and when they knew it. We know now that Richard Helms, James Angleton, and George Joannides were responsible for or complicit in the death of the president, either by criminal negligence or covert action. My recommendations to the task force are: 1, secure and release the personnel file of George Joannides, and 2, ask the CIA to provide a public statement answering the question, why did these 3 men lie to JFK investigators? The answers will help fulfill the task force goal, the president's goal, and the people's goal of full and complete JFK disclosure. Thank you.
Yeah, this is fascinating. This is absolutely fascinating. Look, I know a lot of people believe that the CIA has something to do with Kennedy's death. They believe that it was somewhat of a rigged investigation, where the investigation wasn't necessarily done with clean hands. RFK Jr., that was the key thing that he wanted for Donald Trump for getting in office. I want those files open. I want those files released. And he fully believes that this was somewhat of an inside job to take down an American president. So we will see what comes out of those files. I really need to get somebody who can actually nail that down and have a conversation about it. It is fascinating. It is utterly and entirely fascinating. I want to hit one more story. Do we have time? I think we have time. I don't think we have time. KJ is about to come on in a bit, and he wants to hit not just North Korea, but also what seems to be China in the crosshairs. So a Pentagon report recently came out that pointed out that the United States was in no position to have a war with China. But that's a no duh, right? Unless you are firing nuclear missiles at it, then that's a no duh. With one caveat: the United States has been at war with Russia for the last 3 years. Now, we may say Ukraine is our proxy in this, but at the point where you are arming, funding, you're picking targets, you have bases that are effectively in Ukraine as you point them to attack Russia, and you are killing Russians to the tune of 100, 200,000, I'm going to say that you are at war with Russia. Now, Russia can't acknowledge this. If they acknowledge this, then you're stuck with the fact that you've acknowledged that you're at war with Russia. By the same token, it never went nuclear in that sense, because Russia never acknowledged that it was the United States they were effectively at war with. They took a policy of, all right, we're going to fight it in Ukraine. We're not going to engage nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine because we believe we can effectively win this contest. And we are going to resolve this issue through non-nuclear means. Now, it doesn't mean that the US wouldn't get further ensconced and further ensconced. And every red line that Joe Biden effectively put out, Joe Biden effectively blew off. So when you get this pivot to China with this notion that the US administration wants to effectively pull out of Russia, then what does it mean? Can you have China has less nuclear weapons than Russia? And can you create a situation where you have a low-level conflict without the conflict effectively going nuclear? Now, to call that dangerous is an understatement, right? But it was dangerous in Ukraine, and they still did it. And if anything, Taiwan would be the Ukraine for China. Now, Taiwan is part of China. Even our own communique said Taiwan is China. But that doesn't stop us from loading it with missiles and bullets and guns, etc., and pushing independent movements in it with the notion of breaking away, knowing full well that the moment that they break away, China will lose its mind. China, right now, I don't know if I have a clip, is having military exercises where they are militarily surrounding Taiwan to make the point, once again, we can blockade you. We can blockade you. So this is not a war that we can win. Every war game that we've done on this, we've lost. And the issue is very basic. How do you get ships over to China in a way that China can't blow them out of the water before they even get to you? Right now, with the Houthis, for example, you see what is the USS Truman fleeing after it does its strikes because it's terrified that it's going to get hit by a missile, potentially even a hypersonic missile by the Houthis that sinks the aircraft carrier. What the hell happens if an aircraft carrier gets sunk by the Houthis? What happens, right? And so you're talking about the Houthis. You're not talking about China with the industrial production that is just ungodly. And on top of an industrial production that is ungodly is an extraordinarily sophisticated military with missiles that, yes, can hit the US if they need to hit the US, and yes, can blow anything out of the water as you try to approach China for those attacks. Unless you want to delve into a nuclear conflict, maybe this is something you don't necessarily want to do. That doesn't mean that Trump wouldn't go through pressure campaigns in the way that he did with somewhere like Iran or somewhere like Joe Biden is doing against Russia, because that seems to be the thing that he wants to pivot to. It seems like they're like, we are done with the Russian conflict. We're done with it. We just want it to be over with. We want to move to China. Can he do it? And can he do it in a way that doesn't embroil us into something that is more deadly than the Ukraine conflict ended up being in and of itself, with all of these people dying? It is problematic, to put it mildly. It is disturbing that that is the direction that they want to go. No, I don't think people voted for it, but I don't think people voted for much of this stuff. Trump seems to be motivated by something other than what is in America's best interest. That is fundamentally disturbing. I have not seen conservatives come out pushing back against us. I have not seen a large amount of, let's say, people on the right going after Trump for this. I've seen one or two. The comedian, he was pissed off at Donald Trump, saying this is not what I voted for. But all things being equal, we will see what this quote unquote Asian pivot means. And by the way, this was something Obama wanted to do too, right? Obama wanted to do that Asian pivot. Oh, geez. All right, so I have seen this woman a few times, and I find her to be completely humiliating to herself. Jasmine Crockett, I do not like her. She seems so ghetto. I don't like to use that term, but this is her.
The problem that we have right now is that if we continue down this road, then we will not have a rule of law, because we have people that are currently serving and they're saying things like, ignore the judge's order. What it means to have law and order in this country is that you follow the order and you go through the appeals process, even if you dislike what the judge did. Thank you, and I yield.
And I'll yield back to
Yep.
Mr. Isa. You had a question for me, which I'll yield to you now if you want.
Now that there's no time left.
I'm
Thanks,
happy
Eric.
to entertain it.
You're good. You're good at that, but I'll take my own time. I'll recognize myself. And I'm going to note that when Miss Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as we know her, filed articles of impeachment on Justice Thomas and Alito, Ms. Crockett was one of the co-sponsored along with Mr. Cohen, both members of this committee. It does seem interesting that when the shoe is on the other foot, everyone is self-righteous. And I think this is a good example. For the last
Mr.
3
Chair,
hours, I have had to listen to one side talking about impeachment as though it was the nature of this hearing. It is not.
Okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I've seen videos of her that where she's cursing in Congress. Oh man, the dancing video that didn't necessarily go down all that well. It's problematic. I think she's problematic. I'm waiting on KJ. KJ should be here. In fact, he should be here now. Let me make sure there's no weirdness. Come on, KJ. Come on, KJ. Come on, KJ. Oh, KJ. Got it. Thanks. Okay. Okay. He's supposed to be here. KJ is usually rock solid. So I don't necessarily want to go into another story before he gets here, but we can't have dead air, so we will do it anyway. What is this? White House demands Kiev and Moscow both make concessions, move. Okay. Again, you have no leverage over Russia in this case. Here is, okay, so this is the woman that won the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. Oh, KJ's here. Good. Like I said, KJ is usually rock solid with this. My man, KJ Noh. How you doing, KJ? You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you.
It's always good to have you, KJ. You're a fan, audience favorite. We have a really good crowd today. KJ Noh is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was a contributor to a book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, you are also on a show. What is that show named?
It is called The China Report on the Breakthrough News Network on YouTube.
Fantastic. Check him out. Everything he says is brilliant. I don't want to put you on a pedestal, but I've had some really good conversations with you that I've deeply enjoyed over the years. So thank you, KJ.
Thank you.
China, Wang Li is in Russia right now. What is this conversation that is taking place between the Russians and the Chinese, especially considering it is Liberation Day in America, which is effectively Trump putting tariffs on the entire world? That's supposed to take place at 4 p.m. So that's supposed to take place later today. What is the conversation between Wang Yi and, I would imagine, Sergei Lavrov and the Kremlin?
Well, the discussion is a message. The fact that they're coming together is sending a very, very strong message that the attempt to separate China and Russia is not going to work. If you recall, after Trump was elected, there was a lot of talk about pulling off a reverse Kissinger. That is to say, separating Russia from China to prevent this, strong relationship they had. And this is a direct refutation of this. This is to point out that China and Russia are inseparable in their alliance with each other, and that the U.S. will not be able to, simply peel off and then divide and conquer, as seems to be the plan.
And by the way, apparently Xi Jinping is going to be at the Victory Day celebrations that are going to take place along with other world leaders. There was a thought that Trump may show up, but it doesn't seem that Trump is going to be on the guest list for that. But I do think it's a big deal that Xi Jinping is the honored guest that is going to be at that celebration. Trump is threatening secondary sanctions after the regular. Oh, before I get to that, this story. So apparently, South Korea, Japan, and China are coming together in order to rebuff the sanctions that Trump is about to put on. Now, that's fascinating because these countries have very complicated histories with one another for them to be coming together. As we pointed out once before, South Korea, Japan had comfort women, that slaves from South Korea invaded China. They were at war in the Second World War. So they don't necessarily have the coziest of relationships, and yet we're willing to come together to effectively say, we are not going to accept these sanctions. That's amazing to me. What is the go, please?
No, I mean, I think we have to wait a little bit further to see what the actual content of that coordination looks like. But it is pretty extraordinary, and it seems like Trump is driving his quote unquote allies into the arms of his quote unquote enemies. You know, China, Korea, Japan coordinating together. That is extraordinary. I am still a little bit cautious about making any grand pronouncements about that, because I think there is so much, as you point out, bad blood and also deliberate division and separation that the U.S. has instigated over the years. So I'm still holding my breath, if you will. But just the mere declaration of that is quite extraordinary. You know, it is really, the world is shifting in deep, profound, and unpredictable ways.
That is true. And yeah, that's true. I was looking at this thing for Vance. I'm sorry. Trump seems to be sick of Ukraine. He seems to be trying to pivot China. Look, we're going to get to South Korea in a bit, but I do want to get to this thing of China. There seems to be an Asian pivot that seems to be taking place, or at the very least that they want to take place, or they want to move into. Let me phrase it this way. When in the New York Times, when they came out with their article affirming things that we have been talking about, effectively saying the United States have been supplying intelligence, picking targets, supplying weapons, materials, etc., and the scale and the scope of the materials that we were supplying and the effectiveness of that intelligence has been astonishing. It means that it was the U.S. that was effectively fighting a war with Russia using Ukrainian soldiers just as pieces to move around on the board. Now, they do come up with this thing of, if Ukraine would have just listened to us, we would have totally won this conflict, which completely ignores the fact that Russia beat the hell out of NATO forces in this area, right? But what that also means is that they were able to have a low level, or let's say a conflict, where like 1 million people died, with Russia not acknowledging that the US was effectively the main backer of it. And by not acknowledging it, not having to get into a direct conflict with the United States, which means they could avoid nuclear weapons coming into play, even though there were threats about nuclear weapons being called into play. Is it possible that they are trying to do something similar with China? This belief that, well, we were able to have a proxy, quote unquote, war in Ukraine with Russia without them really acknowledging, because they didn't necessarily want to go to nuclear war. And we can have something similar with China. Now, China has been doing military exercises recently where they surrounded Taiwan Island almost as a show of force, once again, that they could do so. Why are they doing this now? And are they doing this now in response to something that Trump administration is doing?
Yes. And it's also related to what the Taiwan DPP ruling government is doing. If you recall, a few weeks ago, the DPP ruler, William Lai, he's essentially Washington's man in Taiwan, on Taiwan Island. The DPP is the US Quisling party. And he recently declared 17 measures that were going to essentially prevent any possibility of peaceful reunification with China. He, inside those 17 provisions, was a plan to bring back military tribunals, something that they have not had since 2013. So it's similar to Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration. Well, not exactly the same, but it has, the same flavor. And this kind of open, brazen assertion of secession. Remember, Taiwan is part of China. This is recognized by the UN, by the United States, by Taiwan's own constitution, and by all the countries in the world. There is no country that recognizes, two Chinas, or, one Taiwan and one China. There is only one China. Everybody agrees that Taiwan is part of China. And the vast majority of countries in the world, including the US, including the UN, agree that China is the legitimate government of this one China. And so Lai Ching-te is saying that, essentially declaring a kind of de facto secession, and that is unacceptable. That crosses a line for the Chinese. And so they're trying to send a message to him. But we have to understand this in the light of the recent revelations, which you pointed out, that Washington was waging war against Russia. I mean, this was literally Washington fighting Russia directly. They were, directing the plans. They were targeting, they were on the ground, telling and selecting targets, telling them who to hit. And when they say, we lost because the Ukrainians, wouldn't let us do what we wanted to do. I mean, that is absurd. I mean, come on, let's be real here. This is the excuse that always comes out. When Washington loses a war, they always come out with this standard mantra: we lost because somebody tied our hands behind our backs, right? I mean, this is what Scott Ritter says about a potential war, any war. He always says this, but it's been a mantra since the Vietnam War. Somebody tied our hands behind our backs. Otherwise, we would have, demolished them in 2 seconds. So, same mantra, same propaganda. But once again, I think we need to understand this is, the U.S. direct involvement in war against the Russians signals that the U.S. is probably preparing exactly the same scenario for Taiwan. And we know that there are U.S. troops on the ground on Taiwan Island, on Jinmen Island, which is part of the archipelago, that is 4 kilometers away from the Chinese mainland. They're Green Beret on there right now. It would be like, PLA troops on Key West or something like that. That's intolerable. And then we have seen that Pete Hegseth had a memo. It's just recently leaked by the Washington Post, but it's this secret memo which says that the U.S. is preparing to wage war with China over Taiwan. And essentially it's saying that, there is only one war that we are focusing on, and that is war with China. This is the secret memo distributed in mid-March by Pete Hegseth to the entire DoD. There is one war we're preparing for, that is war with China over Taiwan. And then they go over the specific, things that they're going to, they're actively preparing for war. The war is war with China over Taiwan. The war requires pre-positioning, prioritization. The third offset, dispersion, distribution, diffusion of long-range standoff weapons, subsurface weapons, automated platforms, and then the Ukrainized porcupining of Taiwan with asymmetrical weapons. So these recent revelations from the Washington Post, the recent moves towards secession, the State Department's removal of its fact sheet that opposes Taiwan secession, the intensive arming and training of Taiwan as a proxy, including the delivery of Block 70 F-16s. This is the most up-to-date F-16s. The Japanese government is currently drafting plans to remove civilians from the Okinawan Islands near Taiwan. That means the Japanese government is preparing for those islands to be used in war. And then there are heightened war preparations throughout the entire region, including South Korea. That's why they recently had that bombing of, civilians, 152 houses destroyed, because this is, they're doing live fire exercises that are approaching the intensity and tempo of actual war. And we know that in actual war, between 5 and 25% of people killed are actually, friendly fire incidents. And then the most important thing to understand is that Taiwan has always been a threat to China. It has never been independent. And any notion of quote unquote Taiwan secession or independence just means that it's going more and more deeply into the US orbit as a US fire base, as a US forward base, as an unsinkable firecraft carrier. But remember, if the US wages war against China, Taiwan is the key force projection platform. It is the staging area for waging war. And we know that the US had concrete plans, it's out in the public, to nuke China. In 1950 to 1953, they were planning to nuke China from Taiwan. In 1956, this is a single SAC plan. 1958, 1962 to 1964, single integrated operational plans. All of these were plans to nuke China using Taiwan as the base to launch these attacks. So because of that kind of strategic threat that Taiwan Island poses to China, China is sending a strong signal to Taiwan that they should not get any ideas. And if there are any ideas, that China can very rapidly encircle Taiwan and blockade it. So that's the messaging that's going on right now.
Wow. The succession plans that are effectively going through in regards to legislation, does it have popular support?
No, not at all. Not at all. The vast majority, over 80% of the people on Taiwan Island want to keep the status quo. And I think there's only probably about 5% of hardcore pro-Japanese, and they're very pro-Japanese. The William Lai administration is actually a pro-Japanese government. They say that Japan is the motherland, if you can believe it. Japan, which colonized Taiwan, for over half a century. They say that Japan is the motherland. They've been revising the textbooks, telling people, that the liberator of Taiwan was half Japanese, etc. So, but they're pro-Japanese and pro-US. They're actually US quislings. Their vice president was a US citizen, a Jersey girl, until very recently. And so this is the geopolitical chessboard.
I was laughing at the Jersey girl thing. That just sounds funny.
Oh, she grew up in New Jersey, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did she?
Yes.
How do they orient themselves? This puts me in mind of like these Nazi Russians. It's like, okay, how does that work? I don't know how that works. How do you politically shape yourself into being that way? It sounds like that. Like, how do they wrap themselves into this notion that Japanese, South Koreans, like that these things are one-to-one, as you pointed out, slavery, comfort women, and how does this get any level of political support in the country?
Well, you do it. You start it with the kids, and you take the textbooks and you revise them. And they've been doing this for several decades now. And so, for example, they're no longer teaching Chinese history as part of, national history. That's a separate subject. And Taiwan has its own history, blah, blah, blah. We are, separate. And then, the liberator of Taiwan was a Portuguese colony. The Portuguese used it as a slave colony. There was a Chinese loyalist with the Ming Dynasty who fought off the Portuguese and liberated it. And he's revered as kind of the founder, or literally a demigod in Taiwan. If you go there, you'll see temples worshiping him. But his mother was was Japanese. And so they're claiming that, look, he was Japanese, his mother was Japanese, Japan is the motherland. And the important thing to understand is that Taiwan was colonized by Japan from 1895. The Japanese stole it from China as war booty as a result of the Sino-Japanese War. That was the war spoils that they demanded from China, along with the Liaodong Peninsula. But the Liaodong Peninsula was returned to China, but Taiwan was never returned because the US took it over as a forward base to fight the Chinese communists. But during this long period of colonization, as is normal, there was a group of Japanese collaborators. There were Taiwanese who collaborated with the Japanese government. And the current Lai Ching-te government is a continuation of this collaborator class. And so that's why they consider, quote unquote, Japan to be the motherland. One of the first elected, presidents of Taiwan Island was actually part Japanese. And he would, put on a samurai outfit and, do the tea ritual and all of that. It was insane. But it's a little bit like, the Nazis in Ukraine or in Europe. They still have this, longing and desire to connect themselves to this, vicious military force that they see as, the kind of animating spirit of the region and of their quote unquote, politics. So it's ugly, it's disgusting. We have the same problem in Korea. Japanese collaborators who were never purged, and they still hold power in the government. And Yoon Suk-yeol is one of them.
How serious do you think the Trump administration is about this pivot? Meaning, it's one thing to say, okay, we want to get to the Asia Pacific region. Fair enough. Obama wanted to do something very similar. They believed that China was an issue because from America's point of view, we don't want to lose our economic hegemony or military hegemony. And from their mind, China has a massive industrial base. And because they have a massive industrial base, this can also lead to a massive military, in which case we do not want to take a backseat to China. That's kind of the way they seem to frame it. Either we rule the world or we all go up in flames. But as you pointed out once before, some of these people believe that they can win a nuclear war if indeed a nuclear war comes out of it. I get the sense that they think that they may be able to have a low-level conflict if indeed they need to have a low-level conflict without it spiraling into some kind of nuclear oblivion. I think they're out of their minds, but they have to come up with justifications for this kind of pivot and this kind of military force that they're building up around China as this threatening fashion. How does Xi Jinping deal with this? How is he viewing this? I know he has allies like Russia, and like you said, they're closer than allies. And I would imagine in any military conflict, it's not going to be just against China. It will probably be against China and Russia. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But how does Xi Jinping maneuver this in order to avoid a war while not necessarily losing any kind of military positioning in any kind of negotiations or anything that he does regarding policy?
I think that their approach is that we are going to simply connect to the rest of the world and use our relationships with the rest of the world through the BRI, through the, BRICS, to build goodwill and show that another world is possible. And hopefully over the long term, the US will get the message. So it's similar to what actually Chairman Mao did during the Civil War, which he referred to as encircling the cities from the countryside. Simply, send in the PLA or the 8th Route, the 4th Route Army and build relationships with everybody. It's that, thing from Go. In chess, you occupy, you position in order to kill. In Go, you connect in order to live, right? That's what China is doing. It's connecting the world, it's connecting the global south in order to live. So I think that's China's larger strategy. But why does the US believe that it can win a war against China when it has never won a war with a peer competitor, certainly not with Russia, which they didn't even consider to be a peer. It was, gas station, right? And remember, the United States has already fought China in 1950. 1950 to 1953 was a war between, the Korean War between the US and China. There were 3 million Chinese troops that went and fought against the Americans during the Korean War. Chairman Mao sent his own son to fight, and his son was buried in North Korea. So the war between the U.S. has already been, that test has already been conducted. And China was one of the poorest countries on the planet at the time. They were sending in troops into battle without guns. Only 1 out of 3 troops actually had guns. They were going in with mismatched sneakers. They didn't have coats when they were fighting in the winter in Korea. Let me assure you, it's really, really cold. And they still beat the United States, to a standstill. This was when the US was the most powerful country on the planet, and the Chinese were probably the weakest, least developed, poorest country on the planet. And they still beat the United States on the Korean Peninsula. So this is a war that the US cannot win because China is multiples. It's, thousands of times more powerful than when it fought in 1950. But there are 2 things. One is, first there's ideology. I think the US is so trapped in its notion that it is superior and that it has to dominate the world, that it cannot brook the idea that it is going to have a Asian or non-white, non-Western country that has significant weight or heft in the global system. It cannot tolerate that. And I have said this before, I'll say it again, it gives me no pleasure to say this, but I believe that the US is planning to use nukes. I think that they will start with tactical nukes. I think all of their calculations show that they are, that nukes are part of this war plan, that it's a seamless continuum between conventional and nuclear warfare, certainly tactical nukes or non-strategic nukes. So I believe that that's the case. And there's no guarantee that once you cross that threshold, that will stay, non-tactical, that it could very easily go over into strategic nuclear warfare. And so I see that, it's the US ruling class that they would rather see the end of the planet than the end of their power and privilege. Because,
just to be clear, that would be the end of the planet. Because you're right. A tactical nuke is a nuke, and the people will respond in kind.
Absolutely. I mean, there's probably a sector of the defense industry that believes that they can beat China simply by, great strategy and by dispersion, the third offset, automated warfare, drones, automated, battle platforms. But, these are like the people. If you look at the polls, there are 6% of sentient adults in the United States who believe that they can beat a grizzly bear in hand-to-hand combat. I kid you not. You can look up the statistics. They even have like diagrams of how to, beat a grizzly bear. Now, a grizzly bear is like, it's like
huge. Yeah.
I mean, it's like 5 to 9 times the weight of Mike Tyson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, at 1,700 pounds. They have specimens that weigh 1,700 pounds, and yet 6% of adults in the United States believe that they can beat a grizzly bear in hand-to-hand combat. I think this is, the same affliction that may be affecting some of the, the leaders, the war planners, in the United States.
Yeah, I think racism takes people into weird places. And I think the same logic where they say, well, if the Ukrainians just would have listened to us, we didn't really lose it. It was, the Russians couldn't really beat us. They're backwards and they're this and they're that. It's the same logic that Hitler had, right? The moment that we go in, it'll fall over, we just kick it and it'll just collapse in on itself. Missing the fact that no, other people are sophisticated, other people are competent, other people do have capability. And I think and in China, it's ironic because in one sense, you would have JD Vance that would go out and make the speech saying, well, hey, these other countries around the world have gotten far more sophisticated in the capability of what they can build and what they can ship. And so we need to rechange. Well, he's talking about China, right? He's specifically talking about China. These guys are putting out flying cars, moon missions. Like this is not racism leads you astray in regards to your appraisal of your adversary or your enemy. And in China's case, don't really need to be an enemy. It's just we need to maintain a certain amount of hegemonic control. And that control is leading us into conflict. Like the moment that you run into somebody who doesn't want to be controlled, okay, now we have conflict. And it's that in the way that we're dealing with the world, whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's with Taiwan. You would agree with me, though, Taiwan is a red line, meaning regardless of building relationships and everything else, if the U.S. works with Taiwan in order to declare independence, all hell breaks loose, or does it?
Absolutely. It's Taiwan is a pawn on the eighth row of the chessboard. It is a piece, and it will be sacrificed, and that's what their leaders don't seem to understand, or maybe they don't care. It will be sacrificed, but it is such a powerful piece that China cannot ignore it. I've said this before. It's like the Chinese refer to the people on Taiwan Island as their compatriots. They're literally family. The vast majority of people on Taiwan Island literally have family who still live in Chinese mainland in Fujian. They speak the same language, same holidays, same everything. You go to Taiwan, it's simply, it's like Fujian province. It's an island version of Fujian province. But even as their compatriots, we have to understand that the strategic risk that Taiwan poses to China if it becomes a U.S. base, which it was in the past, until the mid-70s, it was a U.S. base. If that continues, that's a red line that China cannot tolerate. And that's why China will have to neutralize it. As I said, it's like a family member. You have a family member who's, going off spiraling into their own thing. You will tolerate them. Okay, they lock themselves in their room. You will give them food and water. That you can handle. But if they start stockpiling guns and explosives and gasoline, how long before the family has to do something to, disarm them, right? That's the situation. Literally, Taiwan is that crazy, family member who is stockpiling weapons and gasoline and explosives, in your basement, and the family is concerned, and they're feeling the need to do something about it.
Let's go to South Korea. Yoon Suk Yeol. So apparently, there's supposed to be the Supreme Court is supposed to make a verdict on him today. Have they made that verdict yet, one way or the other, on whether or not they're going to allow the impeachment to go through?
So the verdict is due on Friday the 4th at.
I thought it was today.
Yeah, not today, but we will know by tomorrow because Korea is ahead. It's already the future in Korea, literally and metaphorically. But so the decision is going to be rendered on Friday, April 4th at 11 a.m. Korean time. This is 123 days after the martial law declaration, over 4 months. And it's 112 days since his impeachment. Again, almost 4 months since he was impeached. The hearings on Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment ended 1 month ago, and the Constitutional Court was sitting on the decision. They were not rendering a verdict. This is an open and shut case. There's no need to delay. Just think, did Yoon Suk-yeol declare martial law? Yes, he did. Everybody saw him on television. It was public knowledge. Okay. Did he break the law in declaring martial law? Yes, he did, because he had no justification for declaring martial law, and he used troops to prevent lawmakers from trying to, rescind the martial law. And, we know from direct testimony that he told, commanders who were at the National Assembly building to drag the lawmakers out, even if you have to shoot them. I mean, this is on the record, it's an open and shut case. Is this unconstitutional? Does this constitute a military coup? It is an open and shut case. There's no need for them to deliberate for over a month on this. And yet they were hanging fire. They were slow.
So why do you think they're
Why?
slow?
It was two things. One is in March 26, the key opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, who almost beat Yoon Suk-yeol at the polls in the elections, 0.7, percent difference, and even that is suspect. But Lee Jae-myung is the opposition leader. He's facing multiple charges because Yoon has been trying to destroy him legally, and there was a case that was going to be adjudicated about whether he had, had some kind of procedural, whether there was some kind of procedural peccadillo during the process of his election. And if that appeal had been upheld by the appellate court, he would have gone to prison for at least a year, and he would have been stripped of political power for 10 years. That is, he would no longer be a viable presidential candidate. Remember, after impeachment, within 60 days, South Korea has to hold a new election for president. He would have been a shoo-in to become the U.S. He would have become a shoo-in to become the next president of South Korea, and he would have distanced himself from aggressive U.S. moves against China. So clearly, the U.S. didn't want him. Clearly, there was strong pressure exercised by the United States on South Korea's political process. We know this because, members of parliament have named, the U.S. ambassador as putting pressure on them. We know that Morse Tan, who was a former, he's a former ambassador at large. This is like a viceroy of the planet. He has said that, the impeachment of Yoon is a Chinese plot, and that once if Yoon becomes president, the U.S. is completely, effed, and they're no longer going to be able to have pressure over South Korea, and Yoon is going to simply be taking orders from Beijing. This is literally what he said. And so I think the first plan was to delay until March 26th. And then the second plan was to delay until April 18th. Now, April 18th is the date that two justices of the Constitutional Court have to retire.
Okay.
I'm sorry, three justices of the Constitutional Court have to retire, that they term out. The Constitutional Court has term limits in Korea, unlike the US Supreme Court. I think it's a good idea, but they have to term out. And if they termed out, there would only be 5 justices left on the Constitutional Court, and that is not enough to make quorum. And so the entire impeachment procedure would have been abandoned because they could no longer render a judgment.
So they're doing any and everything in their power to effectively keep this guy or from issuing a verdict on the case, despite the fact that it is 1 + 1 is 2.
Exactly. There are 3 conservative justices on the court that are very, very pro-Yoon. And if they split the decision, there are currently 8 justices on the court. It should have 9, a full set of 9 justices. But Han Duck-soo refused to appoint the progressive one. That is already a violation of the Constitution. And he was impeached for that. But then the Constitutional Court undid his impeachment. So now he is back in the presidency, and he still refuses to appoint the 9th justice because he's progressive. But there are 3 justices on the Constitutional Court that are conservative, right-wing, pro-Yoon. And if they split the decision so that we get a 5-3 decision or a 4-4 decision, anything less than 6 votes in favor of Yoon's impeachment means that Yoon walks free, and immediately he becomes president again. And if he becomes president again, all hell will break loose. And in particular, Yoon will declare martial law again. I guarantee you that's what will happen.
KJ, that is astonishing. Like, all of this is astonishing. Like, I'm oh man, we're gonna have to close it. But there is a breakdown of institutions across the world in a way that is disturbing, to put it mildly. Like, for example, Romania, where they locked up Carrillo. Okay, well, he didn't want the war. He didn't want the military base. He didn't want to be involved in these kind of gamesmanship of NATO and everything else. And they're like, yeah, TikTok videos, we think it was pushed by the Russians. And come to find out, it wasn't pushed by the Russians at all. We know, like, I don't know anybody who really believed that, but whatever. That's what they used in order to kill the election. He won the first round. He was about to win the second round when the court came in and literally killed the election. And then started throwing people in jail in order to prevent him from running. Le Pen in France, she most likely would have won in 2027. And, I don't know if Le Pen actually committed the crime that they say she committed, but it's pretty coincidental that what they end up with is a way of keeping her from running in the election in and of itself.
The French judges had the discretion to stay her conviction until it was appealed. And that way she would still have had the possibility to run as a candidate. But by arbitrarily imposing before she can appeal, they've essentially ended her political career. And that does not sound like liberté, égalité, fraternité to me.
It does not. No, it does not. It's a bastardization of that process. In America, Donald Trump, I mean, they did everything, shot him, tried to put him in a cage. And the stuff they were trying to put him in a cage for were effectively things that Hillary Clinton herself did. I mean, the whole paying off a porn star and calling it a legal fee, it's not that much different than Hillary Clinton buying opposition research and calling it a legal fee. In Hillary Clinton's case, they gave her a slap on the wrist. In Trump's case, it was like, we need to put you in a cage. Like, this is taking place across the world. And then when you get to South Korea, you're getting something very similar, where regardless of whether you are hard right, hard left, 1 + 1 is 1, or 1 + 1 is 2. Like, any way you look at it. And you can look at the facts and say, okay, I may like him, but he's still guilty of sin for what he was effectively trying to do. But again, they blow it off. We don't have to do it. See no evil, hear no evil. Same thing here in the United States in regards to what they're doing, where they're like, yeah, we're going to get rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but we're not going to say that we're doing it. We're just going to destroy it altogether by firing all of these people and making it a basket case. Or we're going to get rid of the Department of Education. Okay, nobody voted for that. Even chucking people out the country without due process is outrageous. The judge and then argued, well, habeas corpus doesn't apply. Even though we made a mistake, he can't file for appeal. Like, these are institutions that seem to be effectively just falling apart. ICC, I give you another one, International Criminal Court. They go after Putin for taking kids out of a war zone. And then you have to push and push and push for them to go after Netanyahu and Gallant, who are literally committing a genocide.
And then Duterte, remember Duterte, it was, arrested. He's going to be, sent to the ICC,
Yep.
and the Philippines doesn't even belong to the ICC.
Right there.
Right. The hypocrisy is over the charts. But what I see is happening, I think I agree with you absolutely. As the empire is unwinding and unraveling, it's becoming more and more desperate, and it's reverting to naked power. The gloves are off, no more, even pretense of doing things in, quote, a liberal democratic fashion. It's just straight power concepts, as George Kennan called it. And essentially, they're not even bothering to put on the carnival mask anymore. We're just going to straight out do what we want, do what we need. And I think all those examples, including Korea, show that this is just simply making empire is making its violence its last stand, and it's making it very, very violent. With Korea, there's still hope. Some people are still holding out hope that the Constitutional Court could do the right thing, because if they don't, it will be a civil war. It will be.
You really think it would get to that point where are people that committed to the cause? I mean, because here they're bowing their heads. Like when John Hopkins puts out the thing saying, "Hey, if ICE raids and comes to get Raul or whoever because they put a post on social media, just bow your heads. Don't try to help them. Don't try to do anything. Don't try to help them lead." And you're like, okay, so the institution effectively said, just bow your heads. Same thing with Colombia. Like, it's not like you're getting this kind of aggressive pushback from institutions in areas where you think you would get it. They lay down. Do you think that you would get that level of, let's say, aggressive resistance against a court that obviously and clearly just humiliates itself by coming back with a bogus ruling?
I think that, just last week, 2 million people hit the streets. Okay, 2 million people. The KCTU, this Korean Confederation Trade Unions, probably the strongest, most powerful militant trade union in the world, they're out in the streets, and they're calling all their, members, to not only demonstrate, but there will be massive strikes if that happens. The Catholic Priests Association, the entire Catholic Church in Korea, is out on the streets. The Buddhists are out on the streets. The entire country is in an uproar. The country will come to a complete standstill if those justices do not impeach Yoon Suk-yeol, because they know that if they don't impeach Yoon Suk-yeol, they have just given him a license for continued martial law. They will not allow that. And the Koreans have always fought back. They fought back 1948, in 1960, 1972, 1979, 1980, 1987, and 2015. Each time the US puts in a quisling dictator, the Koreans fight back and overthrow them. And they're tired of that cycle. This takes us, for many Koreans, this is Groundhog Day. They're back in the same cycle that they were in 1979. And they went to the streets and shed blood to fight. And I believe that will happen again. So, let's everybody, pray for Korea, pray that those 3 conservative justices do the right thing and follow reason, logic, and standard jurisprudence, and that they uphold the impeachment. Because if they don't, all hell will break loose.
From your mouth to God's ears. KJ Noh, political analyst, journalist, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. Also, KJ, where can people find you for your show?
The China Report on YouTube on the Breakthrough News Network.
Excellent. Thank you, my man. Always appreciate these conversations, KJ. I always learn something new. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
You be safe. All right. We have come to the end. We have had a fantastic show today. I'm beginning to drag ass. My cold medicine is, I think, wearing off. And so I'm going to end this. And I am going to call it a day. But I'm going to go through the chats first. Mr. Oh, there it is. Might Russia use Ukraine victory to drive the United States out of the UN Security Council? No, because technically, despite what the New York Times is reporting effectively that the United States was far more ensconced in the Ukraine, something that we had been saying all along, they don't acknowledge it. And Russia really doesn't acknowledge it. Russia can't acknowledge it because if they do, you're stuck with the fact that you're acknowledging that you're at war with America. And what does your population say when you have 100,000, maybe 200,000 Russians that were killed as a direct result of US influence in Ukraine, pointing to where you need to hit, pointing to the locations where you need to strike? And I remember Andre, who was on the show, he pointed out, he says, look, I was in the room where you had either members of the United States telling them to shell the Donbass region. Okay, well, keep in mind, the Donbass was part and parcel to one of the reasons why the war started in the first place. They killed 14,000 ethnic Russian Ukrainians, and they effectively were building up a military in order to effectively invade. Putin had multiple rationales for getting involved. One was that, another one was NATO, another one was denazification, meaning the expansion of the US into Ukraine was a clear and present threat to Russian security. And just like we would take serious issue with it, we were willing to end the world in the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was existential to Russia. So all hands on deck. And 80% of the population backed Putin in doing so currently. So, but the UN Security Council is permanent, at least for now, until something new comes out. Papa Onaya Shelley, white dudes with money, the America First haters. White dudes with money. Are you talking about Musk? I don't know what that means. I don't entirely know what that means. Dino Pantalucas. Pantilucas. Thank you, Jamal, for your continued excellent reporting and commentary. I try. I don't think the audience appreciates my commentary, but okay. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Alexander G. Trump totally betrayed the anti-war voters. Man, not just the anti-war voters. He betrayed all of those people who thought he was going to be something different. Yes, anti-war voters. Again, Trump looked people in the eye and say, judge me for the wars that I end, not the wars that I start, or something to that effect, paraphrasing. Look the Muslim community in the eye. He had Muslims jumping on stage for him, Muslims for Trump, saying, I'm going to end the war, and then uses it as a ruse to fill Israel up with all sorts of weapons and military and everything else as he goes about allowing them to murder, massacre, and slaughter the Palestinian population and ethnically cleanse that population. I would really pay attention to Syria, because the association between Jelani and Israel and this normalization of relations, it is very possible that Donald Trump may try to use Jelani and sweet deals that he may give, like money or whatever else, to Jelani to take in the Gazans. It wouldn't shock me in the least. Jelani, who wouldn't fire a shot in anger at the Israelis, despite the fact that they were bombing Damascus and stealing Syrian territory, would most likely take that deal. He would most likely take that deal. So bikes a lot. I wish people would know that Trump's tariffs is Larry Summers' plan, with the Fed increasing unemployment, slowing down, the economy reduces. I'm sorry, my eyesight is difficult. I wish people would know that Trump's tariffs is Larry Summers' plan, without the Federal Reserve increasing unemployment, slowing down the economy to reduce inflation. But see, this is going to increase inflation. I mean, like, if, say, for example, it's one thing if you say, okay, we're paying higher wages, or we're not paying higher wages. He's not raising the unemployment rate. It's one thing, and the reason why I say that is you've effectively increased the costs of things just by definition of your tariffs. So everything now becomes more expensive. So that is effectively inflation without any monetary benefit from the standpoint of the American public. Trump believes in his mind that companies are going to take the the heft of dragging their bodies back into the United States. Trump is going to be in office for 3 years. He may die in office. There's no reason for a company to take that risk. If anything, they just bear it and deal with it from there, while we, as the American public, ends up paying more. Now, it's one thing, I understand the logic of it, right? It's like, okay, you have all of these companies who decided to go abroad, pay people less, fire American workers, and we want those companies to come back into the United States with the idea that it will be cheaper to produce those things here since they don't have to pay the tariff. I get the logic. But we have a lot of like parts, materials, supplies, especially like auto parts and those type of things that have this kind of global network in the way that it operates. I don't think Trump is going to get what he wants out of this in the way that he wants it. I think it's probably going to lead to a recession. And not just in the United States, it will affect other countries as well. The European Union, Britain, oh Lord, Britain may take it in the ass. Germany is already in difficult straits. Who knows what is going to happen with them? They've been closing many of their industries because of the energy costs that they've been effectively dealing with. So we will see. Personally, I don't think anybody voted for this. If you want to do no tax on tips, okay, that's one thing. That puts money into the pockets of workers. That's something that you did rally for, that the public, I would imagine, does agree with, especially people who are poor or people who are working low-wage jobs where they can get all of the money back in tips. But the tariff thing, you're having an economic war with the world. And you really believe that the entire world is effectively going to knuckle under, as opposed to taking provocative action, saying we're not going to tolerate this scenario on principle alone. Now, Trump did say he was open for negotiations. We'll see if people are willing to negotiate. It is true that from the standpoint of trade surplus with Canada, they buy far more from us. They sell far more to us than we do to them, in which case we have a heavy lever against them. Same thing with Mexico. But if you're talking about like the BRICS countries, where these countries started to trade with each other far more, less so, right? And what you may end up doing, like China said, hey, if the US wants to do that, we are open for business. They may just reorganize their trading in order to avoid the tariffs that Donald Trump is effectively putting on, meaning as opposed to being this open door for business, because America was supposed to be the capitalist country, right? We've gotten protective. And other countries might just renegotiate and remove, I said this poorly, they may change the way in which they do their trading. So I don't know, Trump is taking a risk. He's taking a big risk. And he is going out on a plank. And I would say he's going out on a plank in two ones. One, with the Russia stuff, even though negotiations seem to have stalled. But two, this is unpredictable. This is unpredictable. And keep in mind, if it hits the economy, his presidency is toast. With Iran, if he attacks Iran, his presidency is toast. Like, there are plenty of things that Donald Trump is doing that he doesn't need to do, that it's creating difficulties for himself. The structure of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And yeah, firing people where you make those organizations difficult to operate is destroying those organizations. Don't give me that shit about, oh, well, he's not really, nonsense. So all of these things are negatives. Having Elon Musk running around like some fairy, some nearly trillionaire fairy with a chainsaw, attacking the poorest people in the country is fucking outrageous. And if you think that that goes down well, you're out of your mind. Yes, they were able to win the Florida elections, but keep in mind, Trump had like a 30-point lead in those elections. Wait till you get to other areas where it is a bit closer. I think in those elections, you're going to start seeing support peel away. And unfortunately, it's not for anything that the Democrats did. It's for everything that Trump is doing. He can lie about it all he wants. He can send his press people out there to lie for him all he wants. Those people are full of shit, except full of shit. I think the American public will see him for what he is. And that's unfortunate. It really is. Because what it means is that the Democratic Party, without doing anything, without representing anything, having zero substance, being completely empty suits, just stand there and say, okay, now vote us in. And we won't do that. We're not going to do anything, actually, but we're not going to do that. Just vote us in. And that is not in the least what I wanted. We have one more. Kevin Wayne. Summer's thing is NARIA. What is this? Non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, damnable policy. Damnable policy. I don't know what that is. I don't know what this is. You've surpassed my political awareness. I know Larry Summers. That was the guy under Obama. Larry Summers' thing is NARIA, non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, damnable policy. All right. Somebody who's smarter than me would know what that is. I'm going to end this. You guys have a fantastic day. I need to check with Garland, see if we're going to be on this evening. I got to be honest. I'm feeling miserable. So we'll see. Like I said, my powers kick up when I'm doing the show. So we'll see what happens. But thank you all for joining me. We had a fantastic crowd. I think we had up to nearly 800 people today. That is great. And the interviews with KJ, Esteban, fuck me. That's okay. We'll bring them on at another time. And Patrick were fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And the audience loved him. So hopefully he comes back. You guys have a fantastic evening. I would see